All right, guys. Let's go ahead and get started over here. Right. How's everybody doing today? Hope everybody's doing well. Okay. So, yesterday we left off with the titles and deeds, and we were going to get started today on ownership limitation restrictions. Now, before I go ahead and continue, do we have any questions on anything that was covered? Anything that you're not clear on? Anything you want me to retouch really quick? Whether it be on the contract side, whether it be on the net formula, and the listing formula, or anything on title deeds or anything like that. Yes, no, maybe. Okay, so let's go ahead and keep going then. And then what I'll do though, before I go ahead and continue, let's just recap what we kind of covered a little bit on the titles and deeds. So that we'll pick it up from there. Okay, so what we said was the difference between title and legal title. You guys remember? Title versus legal title. You guys remember?
Legal title is ownership of a freehold estate.
Correct. Ownership of a freehold estate versus legal before title is just you have ownership rights on a property. Okay. Then from there, what do you guys remember what a deed is?
Deed is like a pass, like a key.
Okay,
to
it's like a key. So essentially, somebody has said something here on Zoom. Okay, I thought somebody said something.
Like a paper.
Hmm?
I don't know, it's like to give you to show you that you have access to.
Oh, that's what it was. It gives you access. The deed gives you access to transfer the title.
Correct.
Yeah.
So the deed allows the title to transfer hands. So in the words of the book, it is a written instrument that conveys legal title. What I mean by that, it is the document that now transfers the title. Okay, so again, that is the document that you receive. So the title will now transfer hands. Now, all those things that you mentioned are examples. Okay, but make sure that you understand what it is. So you don't get tricked. Because those examples will help you understand you, but you need to be able to, also exactly. So what do I say when I mean alienation in real estate? Correct. Transfer of ownership, exactly. Okay. Equitable title is what?
Temporary.
Correct. Now, temporary title in which says that you'll get the legal or the real title upon payment of, whatever at a future date. So now you have voluntary versus involuntary alienation. Voluntary, you designate what happens with the property or that transfer of ownership. So you alienate through deed. Remember what I said. What am I doing when I alienate through deed?
Transfer.
Well, alienation is transferring. So therefore, all the ones that I'm about to tell you, I'm transferring. But what am I doing when I alienate or transfer through deed? What is in very simple terms? What am I doing? Correct, selling the property. Simple as that. Because in order to sell a property, you have to sign a deed. You can't sell a property without signing some sort of a deed. Because that is what actually conveys legal title or the title. Okay, so anytime the book or the exam says alienation through deed, you instantly got to know it's a traditional sale. It's a sale of a property. Correct. Because again, you got to think logically. If I'm alienating a property, this is what I want you to guys start doing. I don't want you to sit there, guys, and just think like, what could it be? What could it be? Okay, no, think about the words. Think about what is being asked of you and what do I know about it? And go back and start looking into your database and say, okay, through deed. Okay, so if I alienate, that means I'm transferring ownership. That means that somebody else is acquiring the property. If I gotta do it through a deed, under what scenarios is a deed used? Okay, well, somebody signs a deed when they're selling a property, so therefore it's gotta be a sale of a property. That's how you arrive at answers, not just randomly remembering, because then at that point it's gonna be very, very difficult to pass this exam. Okay? Not saying that you can't, but you better be a photographic memory person. Okay? Also, the other one would be through will. Okay, and that's going to be you designated through your will whenever you die testate. What do I mean? What does that mean when you die testate? No, it just means you die with a will. That's all that means. So if you die testate, you died with a will. Simple as that. If you died intestate, what does that mean? Right, you die without a will. That is all. So then that is going to be a type of involuntary alienation. Because if you died intestate, you have not designated who's going to keep the property. So now the state comes in and says, now we're going to have to do the descent process. Involuntary alienation through descent, meaning through your next of kin, through your heirs, or your next in line. Then you have escheat to the state. That is when the state keeps the property if there are no heirs. Adverse possession, remember that's the one where you flagrantly take it from another person. You got to follow the guidelines. It's got to be 7 years of open possession, property taxes paid. No, you can't hide it. It's got to be a notorious flagrant, among a couple of others. Okay, and then lastly, we have eminent domain through the process of condemnation. Make sure you know both of those terms, condemnation and eminent domain, because they're both going to be on the exam. But eminent domain is when you lose your property. Yeah, correct. When you lose your property, but through the government for a specific governmental project or some sort of, growth or development that the community is going to be doing. Okay. Also, you have your notice. You have actual notice versus constructive. Constructive notice is when you put it on public record, because whenever you give notice is when you're claiming to the world that you sold the property or you bought the property. And actual notice is when they did it in the old days where they would pass the twig. Acknowledgement is when you sign voluntarily from a notary public. Then we move on to title. Chain of title is essentially the title search. What did we say was the abstract of title? What is the abstract of a book? Correct, the summary. So it's the summary of the title. Then you have opinion of title. Essentially, the opinion of title determines whether the title is marketable or not. And what do I mean by marketable?
The market.
Marketable. What do I mean by marketable? Means that it's a clean title and it can change hands. There are no liens, there are no encumbrances, there is nothing attached to that title that can prevent it from going to another person. Because even if you sell the property and there's liens attached, until those liens are satisfied, that title will not ever transfer hands. Okay? Next, title insurance. What type of title insurance policies do we have? Owner's policy. And what's the other one? Lender's policy. Correct. Good job. So then the owner's policy is purchased by the seller. It's up to the purchase price. It's not transferable, and it's a one-time payment. While the lender's policy is paid by the buyer, since they're the ones getting the financing and the lending, it is a one-time payment. It is transferable for the lenders. So whenever they sell the loan to the secondary mortgage market, like we already learned, they're going to essentially be able to hold that policy and let it transfer with it. A new one won't have to be generated like they normally would if we sell the property on the owner's policy. And how much does the title insurance reimburse the buyer, and how much does it reimburse the lender?
The buyer pays the remainder, right? And the lender pays, no, it's the other way around. The buyer pays the full amount and the lender pays the remainder.
Well, no, nobody pays, they receive from the title company. Like, think about it, it's an insurance that's paying them in case an issue happens and they lose the property. Okay, so next we have our deeds. Okay, like we stated, a deed is the vehicle, the written instrument that transfers the title. So the parts of a deed are the premise clause, the granting clause, the considerations included in the premise clause. You have your legal description, your appurtenances, which remember, an appurtenance is what comes with the property. Things like amenities, things like parking lots, things like improvements, like sheds and things like that. You have the habendum clause, the covenant of season, and the signature lines. Now, a deed must be in writing, as mandatory. And do you guys remember how is a deed, when does a deed become effective or legal? It cannot be signature, because remember, who signs the deed? How can nobody sign the deed? Somebody's got to sign the deed. Oh,
The owner.
what'd you say? Correct, the seller. Correct, the seller signs the deed. So therefore, does the buyer sign the deed? No. So therefore, if one party signs the deed, it cannot go on signatures because there's only one signature on the thing. It's got to be voluntarily delivered and voluntarily accepted in front of a notary public. At that point, it becomes effective and it's a legal deed. Okay, make sure you know that because that's on the exam. That was one of my questions. When does the deed become effective or legal? Upon delivery and acceptance. Okay, then we have our statutory deeds. We have 4 kinds. We have quitclaim deed, which the quitclaim deeds, what's the purpose of a quitclaim deed? Oh, 0-2, 0 for 2, brother, with that word. What is the point of a quitclaim deed? To clear clouds. That's on your exam as well. Make sure you mark that down. Clear clouds. What is a cloud? Correct. Any encumbrance or a lien or anything attached to that title. Correct. Then you have your bargain and sale deed. Your bargain and sale deed, that's going to be for quick sales, like foreclosures and things like that. Okay. Then you're going to have your special warranty versus your general warranty. Like we stated before, special, one thing, general, multiple things. So under this condition, we're talking about the warranty deed. So special means that during the time of ownership, there is no problems with the deed. I cannot guarantee anything before, and I cannot guarantee anything after. So now I ask you guys, if I can't guarantee anything before or anything after, will there be any title insurance? No, because the title insurance guarantees everything. That's why you need a general warranty deed for the title insurance, because the general warranty deed that covers everything with the insurance, it'll cover anything before, anything during, and anything after the purchase. That's anything wrong with that title. So that's why the general warranty deed is the best type of ownership that you can have, because that gives you the full scope of protection when it comes to the property. Okay, then you have your special purpose deeds. Okay, also guys, make sure you know the clauses that belong to each deed, because that could be a question on your exam. Then you have your special purpose deeds. These are the deeds used under special conditions or special purposes. For example, personal representative deed. That's when the person has died or is deceased, and somebody and a representative is signing in their behalf. Kind of like like through a power of attorney or some sort of issue or something like that. Then you have your guardian's deed, and like it says, it's for a minor. Exactly. Committee's deed. That is essentially when somebody's committed to a conservatorium or is mentally impaired. So use committee with committed to a conservatorium or they're mentally impaired, and you'll know that one is for that one. Okay. And then the tax deed is when the person's lost the property to non-payment of property taxes. Okay. Next, we have ownership restrictions. Now, before I continue, that is where I left off yesterday. Any other questions before I move on? And you are correct, Samantha. Any other questions? Nope. Going once, going twice. All right. So government or ownership restrictions and limitations. So essentially what it is that whenever when we own a property, even if it's free and clear, we are technically not, we are the full owner, but we have restrictions and limitations that could mess up our ownership or we can lose the property. For example, we have first government restrictions. And again, I don't mean restrictions as like we can use it or lose it per se, depending on what it is. But remember, we have our bundle of legal rights. How many of them are there? 5. So now, in some of them, it kind of gives you a definition, but whenever you're the owner of a property, you're a member of society also, so there are restrictions like noise violations and things like that, because even though you're allowed to control and occupy and use your property however you want, if you put the music super loud, you know what's gonna happen? Police is gonna come in, and that's gonna be police power. So police power is gonna be one of your government restrictions because it limits or restricts you to use the property exactly to how you want, because now you're bothering other members of society. Okay? Then you have eminent domain, meaning even if let's say you own the property free and clear, and now the government needs it for a government property, guess what? You lose your property. So you're restricted to that issue. Also, taxation. If you don't pay your property taxes, you will lose your property through a tax auction. So ultimately, those are things that even though you're the true owner, free and clear, you're restricted to those and there are repercussions. Then we have what is known as private restrictions, okay? First, we have what is known as deed restrictions or restrictive covenants. Although, hold on one second, make sure. Give me one quick second, guys. Sorry about that, guys. Let's go ahead and keep going. Okay. So essentially, like I was telling you, deed restrictions and restriction covenant. Does anybody know, by the way, what a deed restriction is? Anybody got an idea?
When there's something, well, obviously there's something restricting the deed.
Correct. It's right on the name. So essentially is literally something restricting the deed and its usage. Because, for example, not necessarily a lien, but more so how you use the property. Because, for example, Marion Oaks is a deed restricted community.
Yeah.
Now, meaning that there are certain restrictions that other deed owners are not going to have, or other owners. In the sense that, for example, in Marion Oaks, you cannot park your RV in your property within the community. That's not allowed. If a cop drives by and sees an RV parked in any lot in Marion Oaks, there's a code violation. There's a violation now because you're violating your deed restriction. Okay, so now also when developers create the community, they'll put in restrictions for people to do or not do.
Like
Those,
chickens.
correct. Those are called technically by the word restrictive covenants, but they're also technically deed restrictions, because although they're a subcategory of the entire thing, they still belong within a deed restriction. They're just referred to as restrictive covenants because they're coming directly from the developer. Okay, make sense?
So it will only come from the developer?
I mean, technically, anything that restricts the deed,
Yeah.
whether it comes from the developer or not a developer or previous owner or the city or whatever, is considered a deed restriction. But if it comes directly from the developer when the community was created, kind of like when we talked about the 13-acre parcel for my cousin, that he tried to subdivide that, even though that is a restrictive covenant because the developer created that, it's also a deed restriction. But not all restrictive covenants are, you know what I mean, they're all part of a deed restriction, but not all deed restrictions are technically restrictive covenants. Does that make sense? Like imagine if deed restriction was the main category, and then you have subcategories underneath. Restrictive covenant is anything from the developer, and there's other categories that we don't need to know per se. Okay, just kind of understand that. But for the most part, it's all restrictions on the deed. Next, you have what is known as easements. Okay, so easements are essentially an entryway or a way to use the property outside of, let's say, is essentially a area where you can use other people's properties to access your property. Okay, so for example, go to page, just so you get an idea. Go to page, tell you right now, guys. You go to page 215, and towards the middle and bottom of the page, you're gonna see a little figure. Okay, figure 9.7. That's gonna break down kind of what these easements are. So for example, if we look at the top on the upper left corner of that little figure, you see that it says easement and gross. Well, easement and gross is commonly known as your utility easement. Okay, utility easements are put in place for the utility companies to come in and work and utilize your property without you having to being able to give permission. Because if these utility easements weren't there, what do you think that the utility companies would have to do? They'll have to knock on the door and ask for permission to enter the premises because your bundle of legal rights of exclusion makes it so anybody in your property is trespassing because you have the legal right of excluding anybody in his private property. So if utility companies needed to ask permission out of every customer to get something done, and what if that customer wasn't there? Do you really think they would be able to get anything done? Absolutely not. If they already take as long as they normally do with the easements, when they can go whenever, imagine if they had to ask permission to every customer that there was an issue with. They had to work. You know, so that's why these utility easements were created. So essentially, utility companies can come in on private property as long as they stick within their easement, and now they can do their work and get everything done. Okay. Next, you have what is called an easement by prescription. Okay, now that's not on the little form, but technically an easement by prescription is when you've been using an easement for more than 20 years and now it's been grandfathered in. So let's say your entryway had the way you normally use the property or entered was on somebody else's property, but you have been using it for 20 years consistently, it can get grandfathered in. Okay, so that's easement by necessity. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, by prescription. It's been prescribed because you've been using it for so long. And then you have easement appurtenance and easement by necessity, which you'll see right there in the little square in the center at the bottom. Those are pretty much the exact same thing. Those are when a property has been landlocked, and once you subdivide a property and it's been landlocked, they have to create an entryway using somebody through the property of the other person to be able to go ahead and use your own property. Like, for example, the property that I have, it's like this. Essentially, imagine a square, right? So then what they did was they subdivided an acre right here. So then they created an easement right there to the road. This is the road. So now, this is how the property looks. Let's say it was a 10-acre parcel, they were able to break out 1 acre. And they had to create an easement there, so now I have to enter technically, even though is my easement, it was created on this property to be able to now access that landlocked property back here. Okay, so that's how that works. When it comes to easements. Now, usually, when you subdivide a property, it and it ends up landlocked. Now, to create an easement is gonna cost more money, because now the surveyor has to draw it up, an attorney or engineer has to draw it up. You know, it's gotta be approved, and it's gonna cost a few thousand more dollars to do the deal. Whenever you have to do easements and stuff. So it happens, but that's how that works. So easement of pertinence and easement by necessity, same thing. When a property is subdivided and is landlocked, those go in. Easement engrosses utility easement, and easement by prescription is essentially when it's grandfathered in. Now, what is the main encroachments? What does anybody know what an encroachment is?
That they're encroaching on. They're like, not interfering, but it's.
They're essentially inside your property, like a fence. Like if somebody puts a fence on too far into, not in their property line, but they're inside your property line, now they're encroaching. So anything that's not supposed to be inside your property line that's there is an encroachment. And just so you guys know, and you guys make sure to mark notes on there or whatever. The main purpose of a survey is to detect encroachments. That was a question on my exam. The main purpose of a survey is to detect encroachments. The main purpose of a survey is to detect encroachments. I'm gonna say it one more time. The main purpose of a survey is to detect encroachments. Okay?
Detect those roaches.
The what?
Detect those roaches.
Correct. So next, we're gonna move to leases. What are leases? Lease agreements and the different types. Okay? So when it comes to leases, first, we have a gross lease. And that is exactly what it states. It's one payment and encompasses everything. Everything, there are no expenses and nothing else paid. Everything's included in a gross easement or a gross lease. Then you have what are known as net leases. You can have a net lease, double net lease, or triple net lease. So essentially what that means is that the more expenses that the tenant incurs, the more nets it'll end up adding up. So if let's say they pick up electric, they pick up, let's say, and usually net leases are for commercials. Okay, it's not gonna be your traditional renter. You know, a rental for regular residential properties is gonna be your traditional lease, like an easing gross for the most part. This is what you pay, this is what you pay. But now when you're dealing with businesses and commercial property, you negotiate all those things because it's a business. So you can negotiate utilities, you can negotiate, for example, any kind of trash, you can negotiate lawn care, you can negotiate many things to either be included or the person pays it separate. So the more expenses that the tenant incurs, it is known as the more nets. Now, there's no particular exact formula or exact amount of one net versus the other, because depending on the property, there can be a lot of expenses or very little expenses. So the only thing you need to know is that when they say a net lease versus like a triple net lease, all triple net lease means is that there's a lot of expenses along or several expenses along with the main rent. And that's something that you only have to negotiate. There really is no way to know what exactly is in a triple net lease versus a double net lease. But just know that the more nets, the more expenses the tenant incurs. Okay. Next, you have your variable lease. Okay, so this is a type of lease agreement in which it variates based on an index, okay? What do we say an index was? You guys remember?
Index is kind of like, its margins, like, why are we related to the stock market, because it can fluctuate going up and down.
Well, not necessarily to the stock market. It
Right.
can be attached to the stock market, but it's not what an index is. So an index is a determination of the economy, how well it's doing or how well it's not doing. That's why the index will go up and down. Now, an index is attached to, it's like an S&P 500 or something like that. But ultimately, it just determines the economy. The economy is good, the index goes up, and the economy is down, the index comes down. So that's why whenever you have variable interest rates, they attach them to an index because that moves the interest rate up and down based on how good or bad the economy is doing. So now when it comes to variable leases, okay? Let's say you have let's assume that a building rents for $12, okay? $12 per square foot. Okay? So let's say a lease rent for $12 per square foot, and the index is 1.5. With an index of 1.5. Okay? Now, let's say that the market or the economy went up. So now, this coming new year, the index went up to 1.5. So the new index is 1.8 now. So now, what is our new rental rate? Okay, so I'm just writing what is new rental rate. Okay? Now, guys, this is an equation that unfortunately you kind of have to not necessarily memorize because it's very, very simple, but it's something that you just kind of have to know, because that's all you're gonna get. $12, 1.5, and 1.8. In every problem that you get like this, you're gonna get $1 per square foot, that's the rental rate, an index and a new index. Okay, so all you have to do is divide these two indexes together and then multiply it by whatever the dollar per square foot is, and that is going to give you the new index rate or the new index or the new rental rate, sorry. So now this is how it works. Okay, guys? So the actual equation, right, is going to be new index. But this is the thing, don't worry about writing it right now. Just let's look at it times the rental rate, times the rate. That's the equation, new rate. And that's the rental rate, okay? So now, like we already stated, they gave you these three things. The only two things that you can do is figure out what the index is and then multiply it by what the rental rate is. So in this case, they already, obviously we know that, but we got to think about what the problem stated. So what is the new rental, what is the new rate? Or the new index, I'm sorry.
0.83.
So what can we deduce from the problem? It went from 1.5 to 1.8. So what is going to happen to the new rental rate? Correct, it's gonna go up. So it's gonna increase, okay? So now this is your trick or your hack. Because if, let's say, you remember that you have in the exam that you have to divide these, but you don't remember what order. Whichever way you flip it and you multiply it by the rate, both the answers are going to be on the test. So whether you do it one way or the other, the answer will be there. So just by winging it doesn't mean that you're going to get it, because again, they're going to expect you to do it the wrong way. So how do I check myself in case I cannot remember which one is which? How can I check myself to make sure that I never have to worry about remembering which one is which? And all I know I have to do when I see this like this, old index, new index, divide them, multiply by the rate. But this is the key. What did the problem tell me happened? The problem told me that the index increased. Okay, so now let's do some quick math. Now you take your calculator, and since you know you gotta divide those, you go in and divide, let's say, 1.5 times, or I'm sorry, 1.5 divided by 1.8. Correct. Just to try it out. Well, I got 1.5 divided by 1.8. I got 0.8333 repeating. Now, that could be one option, right? The other option would be doing it 1.8 divided by 1.5. If I do it like that, which by looking at the equation, you know that's the proper way to do it. It's gonna give me 1.2. Okay, so this is your hack, guys. Regardless, the only thing you have to know is that you have to divide the two indices together and multiply by whatever number they give you. But in case you can't remember which one is which, and you're not stressing about it, this answer tells you what is going to, which way to do it. If it tells you increase, and you divide them both together in both ways, and now you multiply by the rate, what's gonna happen when you divide a number that's less than 1 by 1, or by the number? You're gonna get less than the number that you started. So therefore, if the problem told us that the rate increases, and you multiply by 0.8, the rate is gonna decrease. So automatically, you're gonna know you did it backwards. Because this number tells you that in order for the rate to go up, it's gotta be more than 1. If it's not more than 1, you did it backwards. Because again, the problem told you it increased. And the only two options you got is to divide those two indexes together. One is gonna be negative or less than 1, one is gonna be more than 1. There are no other options. So the minute that you divide them together, if you can't remember, just look at the one that is above 1. Because that is going to be, based on the problem, the increase that you're gonna need. Because again, if you multiply by less than 1, you're gonna get a smaller answer. You're gonna get 83% of whatever, that division will be. Okay, or the rate. So in this case, you know it has to be this one. So whenever you take your 1.2, you multiply by your 12, and that is gonna give you 1441. So now per square foot. So now your new rate is gonna be 14.41. So it went up by $2.41 per square foot. So, because if you multiply by 0.33 repeating times 12 is gonna give you, same thing, 9.996. Obviously, that's less than 12, so you did it backwards. They just told you on the problem that the index increased, so your rent has to increase. So that's the answer. Just again, understand it's a very simple problem, guys. But the only thing you have to do is remember which way you divide these two indexes together. And again, the minute that you divide them, if you don't get above 1 and the problem told you that it's going to increase, you did it backwards. If the problem told you that the index decreased and you get less than 1, we did it right.
I came up with 14.3 from that. That's so funny, 14.33.
Correct. So it's going to be something along those lines.
Yeah, because I took the 0.83 and then I came and I added. So what I ended up doing was I added the 2.33 to the 12 per square foot. So I ended up adding after taking
2.33. What 2.33 are you talking
I
about?
took that 0.833 and then I multiplied and then I added the 2.33 to the 12 and I. Oh my goodness.
Hold on, I'm
Yeah, don't
confused.
even worry about it. I don't even know.
Okay,
So,
yeah, do not do that because that may have worked over here, but it's not gonna work on the exam.
no.
So again, this is how you do variable index leases, guys. Just take the two indexes, divide them together, multiply them by the rate. If you get less than 1, it's gonna decrease. If you get more than 1, it should increase it. The problem tells you which way you should go. You want to remember the equation, you can never get it wrong, but at least this is a logical way that you can check yourself and make sure that in case you, because I couldn't remember. And when I took my exam the first time, I didn't have this logic down. So I probably got it wrong. 'Cause I couldn't remember what to do. Okay? So let's go ahead and erase this so we can do the next one. So that's gonna be variable leases. Now we're gonna do what is called as gonna be percentage leases. Okay? So a percentage lease is used a lot of the times for, let's say, companies that are like retail companies or companies that have sales. The reason for that is percentage leases used sales to essentially charge you a percentage on top of the rental rate. Okay, so for example, let's say there is a lease that calls for a monthly minimum rent of $1,000 plus 3% of the annual gross sales in excess of 325. What is the annual rent for the year if the annual gross sales were 450,700? Okay, so now they're telling us that rent is $1,000 per month. And then they're telling us that they're gonna charge us 3% on anything above 325. So anything that's above 325 in sales, we have to pay a 3% fee on top of our $1,000. Okay, but now they're telling us that our sales, our actual sales were 450,700. Okay, so now what do I do? Okay, they want to know what is the annual rent if the annual gross sales were 450,700.
Would you minus 325 from 450,700?
Correct. I need to figure out how much I'm gonna get first. I need to figure out, like you said, how much I'm paying on the 3%. So if they told us anything above 325 and we sold 450,700, we gotta find that difference. And that difference is 125,700. So what do we do now?
So then you take your percentage.
Multiply what? Okay,
The 3%.
correct. Now we gotta figure out how much that 3% of that, because that's what we're gonna get, we're gonna pay on. So we multiply it by 3%, and that is going to give me 3771. Okay, and now what? What do I do now? That I know how much?
You add your 1,000.
Okay, so I add my 1,000. So therefore, but what did the problem ask for though?
The annual rent, the annual, so then you have to multiply, no. Yeah, what is the annual year if the annual gross sales are, to multiply it all by the 12, right? No.
Well, I can't multiply it all because now I'm just cheating myself big time. I'm gonna pay way more than I should be paying.
No,
So,
you just take the portion that you were over. Okay, that's.
Multiply by 12,000. I
right,
mean, plus 12,000.
absolutely. You take the 1,000 that the problem said it was your monthly rent. That was 12. Simple as that. 12,000. That's your yearly rent. So then now you take the 12,000.
You add it.
Right, and you add the 3771. So that means that your yearly rent for this property is gonna be 15,771. Because you're paying 1,000 a month, and then you're paying a total of 3771 based on the 3% that you gotta pay on anything above the 225 in sales. So we paid 3% on 125,700, which was how much we sold above the 325. Make sense, guys? Simple as this is a percentage lease. Okay, just use your logic. And always remember that read the problem, because the problem tells you they're asking annual, they're giving you monthly. Make sure you keep that in mind and make sure you read, so that way you know exactly what they're asking for. Because if, let's say, we did this, 3,771 plus 1,000, that's gonna be 4,771. Guess what's gonna happen? Answer A was gonna be 7,771. Answer B will be 4,771. Answer C will be whatever. So now when you add that 1,000 and you see that 4,771, you look in your answer choices, see that 4,771, you'll say, oh, there it is. That's what I had to do. You'll mark that and you just got a question wrong because you didn't read the question. And they're going to put the most common answers, the most common mistakes as answer choices. And that is a very common mistake. So make sure you read and understand what the problem is asking before you begin taking the test, or at least each question. So that way you don't make this mistake. Okay? So now that is going to be, again, your percentage leases. And then what are these percentage leases usually used on? What type of properties or what type of businesses?
Commercial, retail sales.
All right, anything that does sales, like retail businesses and things like that. Okay, so now the last one we're gonna have to cover is going to be a ground lease. Okay, so a ground lease essentially is a long-term lease. A ground lease is usually when you just rent land for up to 100 years. So if you've noticed all these shopping malls and strip malls that we find in many different places, a lot of the times the owner of the strip mall doesn't own the land. They rent the land. So it's under a ground lease. Since ground leases are such long-term leases, and let's say you do a 50-year ground lease or a 100-year ground lease, well, it allows the investor to safely make that investment of putting that strip mall and building it, because they have so much time to get their money back out that they don't mind leasing. Now they don't have to acquire the land. So that's kind of how a lot of these deals are done when it comes to shopping malls or shopping strips and things along those lines. Now, it's not to say, though, that all of them are like that, but there's a good majority of them that do work that way. And there are customers that have parcels of land that they don't want to get rid of. They just want to do a ground lease. So the person takes care of the property, but they still technically own the land. Okay. Next, we have assignment and subleases. Okay. Now, when it comes to assignment and some subleases, assignment is exactly what we talked about. What is an assignment? Huh? Correct, but give it to me in layman's terms. What is an assignment? Is when you transfer, ownership rights. You're assigning something to somebody else. Okay? Now, a sublease is where essentially you're creating a lease within the lease, if you want to look at it that way. That is more commonly used, at least in the experience that I lived, in college towns. You tend to do a lot of subleases in college towns because, for example, if I rent an apartment or a house with 3 of my buddies, which happens quite often in college towns, where four friends will go and rent a home inside the college campus, and the 4 of them will split the lease agreement or the lease between everybody gets a room and everybody pays for their room or whatever. But let's say now I'm going to go study abroad for a semester. Okay, so if I go study abroad, I'm not going to pay my lease or my rent while I'm studying elsewhere, because now I'm going to have 2 rents. I'm going to have to pay abroad in the whole trip and the rent while I'm not living there. So a lot of students, what they do is they'll do a sublease. They already have the main lease, but then they'll bring in somebody to take over their room and their responsibilities within the lease for that semester, while everybody else that stayed carries on with their lives normally. Okay, so those are going to be what is a sublease. Okay, next we have liens. All right, liens are essentially a claim to have a debt or other obligation satisfied out of the property belonging to another. So if you don't pay a debt and then the contractor or whoever is the creditor may or may not put a lien on the property. Remember when we talked about the compensation to the broker, when can somebody put a lien on the property? What must be in place, or what must have been in or happened in order for somebody to put a lien on the property, aside from the person not paying the property?
If you sign.
Yes,
you
so
sign a contract or-
correct. It must be on the contract. There must be something stating in the contract that if you don't pay, they can put a lien on the property. Okay? So that's gonna be your basic lien. Now you have, for example, look at page 219. And on line 1, what does that say? Can somebody read that to me? In bold. Line 1 on 219.
Voluntary.
Line 1, page 219. Line 1, page 219.
Oh, general specific.
Okay. No problem, guys. So essentially, what does that say? General and specific liens. What is another word for special? Specific. So what have we have arrived to? The exact same thing we've been dealing throughout the course. General liens versus specific liens. So what does that really entail? A lien that is very specific to the house versus a general lien is specific to any assets that you may have. So not only can they take the property that it's attached to, but other assets that you may have as well. So now we need to understand that there are certain liens that are general and certain liens that are specific. Usually, general liens deal with the government on source or some sort of judgment. Because in order for them to be able to access or get your other assets, it's gotta be a governmental or a judgment of some sort, court related. Because look at the ones that are general liens. Okay, general liens are judgment liens, income tax, IRS liens, or estate tax liens. Okay, so those are gonna be your general liens. All right. Then you're gonna have specific liens. Specific liens, again, are what? Liens that are specific to what? Specific to what, though? Correct, to that property and that property alone. Okay? Now, again, always make that connection to what are you talking about. So those specific liens are the more common liens that we know. For example, constructor liens or mechanical liens. Those are your traditional roofer, plumber, electrician, that the person don't pay, well, now they put the lien on the property. That's what you call a construction lien or a mechanical lien. Okay, laborer's lien, materials lien. Then you have your property tax and special assessment lien. Okay, property taxes only affect that one property, and special assessments, because what are special assessments, guys? You guys remember what special assessments are?
And it was in regards to the property tax?
You're correct. I just said property tax and special assessments. So if they're related, what could the special assessments be?
Well, it's
Technically, it's a lien, yes. But essentially, a special assessment is an extra tax that's been levied on the property because of an improvement or something that needs to happen in the city. For example, roads being paved. If the road's being paved, anybody that is gonna benefit of that road has to now put money into the project by law. And they'll attach the special assessments to the property, which is a lien. Okay, so now also, now that we talked about the connecting to water, we talked about that yesterday. Do you remember? When we talked about the expansion of the municipal city line into the Shores and Marion Oaks. Well, now in order for people to connect to the city water, they have to pay money because that costs money to get them to connect. So then they're gonna get a special assessment or an extra tax that they'll have to pay over a certain period of time. You know what I mean? And eventually, if you live in the shores, I don't know if did they already give you the notice and everything about that or not yet?
No.
Well, that'll come eventually with the increase, with the increase of the property law. But again, think about the word assessment. Anytime that you see the word assessment in this exam, for the most part, it deals with property taxes. Hence, the word assessment value. That is the value based on property taxes. Who is the person that value or figures out what the property taxes are? As a property assessor. They're not called some random name. Everything is related. So assessment, assessor, all deals with property taxes. Special assessment, things like that. Then you're gonna have your mortgage lien. Which one is the mortgage lien? Yeah, that's the one the bank puts on. Okay, and what about the vendor's lien?
You've done work, somebody did some construction work.
That is the mechanical or constructor's lien. So the vendor's lien is technically a name for like an owner financing deal. Because the owner financing or whoever the owner is or financing, that is technically the vendor. They're selling the property out to you. But they have to put a lien because in case you don't pay your stuff, they got to be able to get their property back. Okay, or be paid off on the sale. All right, so those are going to be your specific liens. Okay, know those. Also, when it deals with liens, how are liens paid out? Ideally or normally, does anybody know?
Well, you can pay a lien out, however, a person can pay it out in a lump sum, or they can just pay it.
No, in what order? Let's say the property has 3 liens.
Oh, yeah, well, it's whatever's in priority, like whatever is the first lien, and then you go to the next one.
But how do you determine who's the first lien or second lien?
Well, it's how they're filed.
Meaning, and how are they filed? That's what I'm saying. It's based on date of
Right,
recording,
the
is
date.
what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
Correct, because that's the only way we'll know when they're filed.
In my brain,
Yeah.
the date, but. I'm
Correct. So it's the date that they're recorded. The only problem though is that they are what you call superior liens and junior liens.
Yeah.
Superior liens, regardless of when they were recorded, will take precedent over the junior liens because those are more important
That would
in
have
the word
like
in.
tax stuff.
Correct. So real estate property tax liens, special assessment liens, and federal estate tax liens are always going to be priority over junior liens, which are going to be your mortgage liens, judgment liens, vendors liens, and income tax or IRS liens. Okay? So make sure though, income tax liens are a junior lien though. Keep that in mind. Not all tax liens are superior. Income tax one is junior. Okay? And then lastly, you're gonna have what we call a subordination agreement. We already discussed that at a previous chapter. Does anybody remember what a subordination agreement is? Excuse me. Think about the word.
Church basically, like you have an agreement in place, whatever you, like you can only do so much.
Nope. That is deed restriction. So who's a subordinate? Listen to what we're talking about. What have we been talking about just now? No. What have we been talking about? Liens. We were talking about superior liens, general liens. That's what I've been talking about this whole time. So therefore, if we're talking about subordination agreement and superior liens and being able to be paid off, what is subordination agreement? So who's the subordinate?
Technically, a lien holder, or a lien holder, but the lien-
No. I'm saying just in general life, who is a subordinate? That's underneath you. So if somebody is underneath you, and we're talking about lien priority and getting paid out, no. The subordination agreement is the agreement where you forfeit your place in line. So what I'm trying to get you to understand is that if you build the logic that the subordinate is the one underneath, it should remind you that a subordination agreement allows you to go underneath and lose your place in line if you choose to do so. So essentially, if let's say you are a roofer and you don't get paid, I'm a plumber, I don't get paid, but you file your lien before mine, you're supposed to get paid first. Because you get paid and we have the same type of lien and you get paid on priority. But let's say that you know that the owner is gonna get a settlement down the line, but there's gonna be a payment made and you're only gonna get paid partly. You can say, okay, well, I'm gonna forfeit my place in line, wait for that settlement to come in so I can get paid in full. So then you will do a subordination agreement, lose your place in line, forfeit that place, the other get paid, and then eventually you get paid your full lump sum. So, but the only thing that I'm trying to get you to understand is that subordination agreement should trigger subordinate. It's on the word. Who is the subordinate? The person underneath, the person on top. So therefore, if the subordinate is the one underneath, the subordination agreement will allow you to go underneath. So therefore, you're forfeiting your place in line. I'm just teaching you a way to think, how not to remember or memorize this word. That's all I'm doing, creating a mental connection with your brain. If you can hopefully get it, that would save you from remembering, because that word and that term will 100% appear in your exam at some point or another. Whether it's in the answer choices, whether it's in the question, it will pop up. You will see subordination agreement. And I hope you understand what it is, because if you don't, it'll make your test way harder. And it's a word that it's fairly simple to really get the gist of it if you have the logic down. Okay, guys? That's going to be chapter 9. Everybody good with that? Any questions whatsoever? Anything that you would want to ask, clarify, figure out, or anything like that? Yes, no, maybe? All right. So everybody go to chapter 18. And actually, guys, before we start at 18, let's take a quick 5-minute break. So that way people can move around, because a lot of us are a little bit tired today. So let's go ahead and move around 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and go, because we'll probably do a couple of breaks today, just to give you guys some time to move around and get refreshed. So we'll be back in about 5 minutes. Let's go ahead and keep going. So now everybody on chapter 18. This is going to be taxes affecting real estate. Okay. Now we're going to get into actual taxes. All right. Now let me go to my. Anyone here? Okay. So now when it comes to your taxes and your property taxes, now ad valorem taxes is what we essentially utilize in our economy. And those are according to the value. So then the assessor will utilize the value and try to determine more or less what the assessed value is, which the assessed value on a property is not necessarily the real value. That's just the value that the assessor provides or gives the property for the purpose of calculating property taxes. Okay, so again, the assessed value is not the actual value of the property. It is the value given to be able to provide property taxes. Now, when it comes to property taxes are paid in arrears. What do I mean by that? What do I mean when I say it's paid in arrears? No, it's paid at the end. So it's paid at the end of the period, not in the beginning. Okay, so ultimately,
Yeah.
it's okay, it's okay. And a lot of the times, I mean, because technically, that sentence could qualify, because if you don't pay within December, technically you're given up until March to pay, or April. So technically it would be the year before. But ultimately you pay in arrears, meaning at the end, as opposed to in the beginning. Okay, because like rents, they're paid in the beginning. You know what I'm saying? Property taxes are paid at the end as a one-time payment. But essentially your tax cycle begins on January 1st. Okay. Then on March 1st, you have your tax exemption filing period ends. What do they mean by your tax exemption? When it comes to your property taxes and stuff like that, what are they referring to?
Homestead,
Correct, your homestead.
whatever,
So essentially, what is a homestead?
and I'm living there, as you bought it and you're gonna live there and you don't plan on moving right away. Or you just,
That was
you're
close.
claiming
Was that?
rentals. Go ahead.
The primary.
Correct, that's the key. You're declaring to the government or the state that that is your primary home. That is where you and your family reside. That is the key to the homestead. That's the whole point. It's called homestead because that is your home, your primary residence. Now, whenever you claim or file for homestead, there's benefits and there's perks because you live there. You get some sort of protection. We'll cover that later. Okay? April 1st is when property taxes become delinquent. So the way, and then November 1st is when they become payable. So essentially, your property taxes for the entire year will begin and be due on November 1st. If you pay before the end of the year, you get a discount. So if you pay right away, whenever they arrive, you get a discount and you don't have to pay more. Okay? But if you wait to pay, I believe in either in December or in January, now you're gonna have to pay a little bit more. You won't get that discount. You have to pay the full bill. So ultimately, April 1st is when officially the taxes become delinquent. Okay? So now, and then from there is when now they'll start to essentially sell the certificate, and then they're going to tax auction, et cetera, and that's when you lose the property. After certain years of property taxes not being paid. Every year every state varies. Okay? So next, we have, and if you want to use figure 18.1 right there, it'll show you the scale, but we already went over it. Okay? So now when it comes to your property taxes, okay, property taxes are also a thing that you can contest because just like evaluating a property is an estimate and the assessor is the one that's most qualified to give us that estimate. So ultimately, if we go ahead and think that our property taxes are too high, there is an entire process for us to file an appeal or contest it, which is called the protest procedure. Okay? Now there's 3 steps or 3 things you can do to go ahead and see if you can get your property taxes decreased or altered if there's a mistake. First, step 1, you have to contact the property appraiser's office for your state or your county. Okay, so ours would be Marion County Property Appraisers. You can contact them. That's your first step to file a complaint. Step 2, if the property appraisers looks at it and say, nope, that price looks right to us. Now your next recourse would be the Value Adjustment Board. Okay, that would be the next recourse that homeowner would have to say, hey, look, I don't think my taxes were done correctly. I think they're too high. Okay, so then the Value Adjustment Board will go in and relook at the file. If the Value Adjustment Board then says, hey, you know what? Everything looks right to us. Then the homeowner will have one last recourse to see if they can get them decreased. And that would be to file a lawsuit and go ahead before a judge and determine if the taxes can be decreased. If after that, the judge says, hey, man, or hey, lady, they are what they are. That they are correct. At that point, you got to pay them. Okay, you just went through 3 different mediums to be able to get that done, and they'd say no. Okay, so now whenever we're dealing with property taxes, there are several types of properties that, depending on their classification, they're going to either pay, not pay, or partially pay. So first things first, we have immune properties. Okay, and that's on page 409. Immune properties are properties that are governmental properties that are immune from property taxes, meaning they don't even get assessed. The government doesn't even touch them because they're governmental properties. Okay, so immune properties could be federal government properties. Examples could be courthouses, military facilities, and things along those lines. Okay? So then you have what they call exempt properties. So exempt properties, the assessor goes in and assesses the entire property and says, this property taxes should be this much, but since they're exempt, they don't have to pay them. Okay, so these are gonna be your nonprofits and your church organizations. Okay, but immune properties, they don't even get assessed at all because they're governmental properties. Then you have your exempt properties, which are your nonprofits and things like that. They're exempt from paying, but the government still runs the numbers so they can have revenue. Okay, so make sure you know the difference. Immune, completely immune, no taxation, no assessment. Exempt properties, they don't gotta pay it, but they still get assessed, so the city keeps record of what they should have paid. But since they're nonprofits and church organizations, they don't have to pay, okay? So that's exempt properties. Then also, guys, you have what is called a partially exempt property. Okay? So a partially exempt property would be what? What do you guys think a partially exempt property would be?
Well, maybe part of it is for a church and the other part is for homestead.
It's a good guess, but no. So what happens what ends on March 1st? That you just said earlier. Your opportunity to do what? File for what? Which is called? Correct. So therefore, and when you file homestead, you get what?
You get a discount.
Correct, in your tax break. So therefore, when you're homesteaded, you're partially exempt because you pay part of the full amount because you're homesteaded. So that's what they mean by partially exempt. A property that's homesteaded. A property that's fully exempt doesn't pay taxes at all. A partially exempt property like your homesteaded property pays partial taxes, or you get discounts and perks. Okay? Next, taxable value. Okay? What do you think taxable value is? Think about the name, guys. In its very simple form. Don't go beyond. Taxable value. What do you think that would tell you?
The value of the home is taxable.
Okay, what do you think?
Tax based on the value of the property.
Well, that's property taxes. That's what ad valorem taxes are. But what are what's it called? The taxable value. So to make it simple, it is the value or amount that the government can tax you on that. Because think about it like this, if you're partially exempt, you have exemptions, meaning you have a discount. So now when the property is assessed, they're gonna give you the full amount of what the assessment is for the property. Then, if you got exemptions, you gotta subtract that because you're exempt from those amounts, and then you arrive at your taxable value, which is the value that the government can now tax you on. Does that make sense? Hence why it's called your taxable value. Now, every county or everything along those lines will have a tax rate, okay? Because they gotta tax us on something. So it's the tax rate is the actual amount that they're gonna tax us on. So then what you do is you take your taxable value, multiply by whatever the tax rate is, and we've arrived at the amount that we pay for property taxes.
Is there like a fixed rate for it?
No, because there's several things that go under the tax rate. For example, we pay 3 different taxes that fall in that category. And we're gonna do that in just a second. But I want you to get the basic equation and the logic of it all. So let's look at it on the board real quick, okay? Let's look at the board. So imagine, or just kind of look at it this. So first things first, when the appraiser or the assessor, I'm sorry, when the assessor goes in there, you can't see that, or you're stretching? Okay, cool. I just didn't know if you can see it. So then when the assessor goes in there and says, oh, okay, well, this is the property, they do their study, their numbers or whatever, they're gonna kick out and assess value. How much is that property assessed at? Whatever their calculations are. We don't have to worry about that because we don't gotta calculate assess value. They're gonna give it to us. Okay, Now, what did I say that happens when you homestead your property? Okay, but then what do you get when you homestead it? You get discounts, you get exemptions. Okay, so then, since you have exemptions, you can't necessarily pay on those. You gotta be able to remove those exemptions, otherwise you're gonna pay higher taxes. Okay, so then you will remove the exemptions that you may have. If, let's say, you're homesteaded among other ones we're gonna look at. And that is going to give you your taxable rate, meaning, or your taxable value. What can the government tax me on? The actual amount that I'm gonna be taxed on now. And now, once I know how much I'm gonna be taxed on, they're gonna tell me what the rate is that I'm gonna be taxed on. So you just multiply by the tax rate. And that is going to give you your property taxes due. And that is how your taxes are basically calculated. The assessor goes out, provides the assessed value. Do they have any exemptions? Are they homesteaded? Yes, they are. Okay, we work out the exemptions. Now you get the taxable value, which is what the government can tax you on. And now you multiply by whatever the tax rate is for that county or the city or whatever, and it provides you your property taxes. That's the basic equation, guys. Now we're gonna dive in and we're gonna start figuring out the actual amount of the property taxes. And we're gonna have to see, because, for example, on the tax rate, we pay 3 different types of taxes. We pay city, county, and school board. Those are the 3 taxes that we're gonna pay in this exam. Even though in real life, if you look at your tax bill, there's gonna be a bunch more. Little things, stupid things. They're not gonna test you on that. They're just gonna test us on the school board, the city, and the county. Okay? So next, 13.3. Okay, so now these are the rules when it comes to calculating your property taxes. Now, when a property is assessed at $75,000 or more, so assessment. Actually, I'll put it right here. When the property assessment of 75,000 or more, then these are the exemption rules that the government allows. Okay? Make sure you understand, guys, this is only for homesteaded people. Okay? Also, the assessment has to be 75 and above. Now, there's in the book, they're going to essentially, and just so you guys see here, if you guys see the reflection. See if I can remove that reflection. There you go. 75,000 or higher. Now, usually when a property is worth $75,000, let's say, in this market, what are we kind of buying? Pretty much land at this point, or essentially if it does come with a property, like she said, it's going to be a beat up property. If you can even find them at those prices anymore. But ultimately, so for the sake of the exam, because in the book, when you go in and study, there's different categories, because, for example, anything between like 25 and 75 has a formula that you have to work it out because it's not exact. In the exam, you're always going to get a 75 and above. So don't worry in the book trying to learn all the other ways, because you're not going to get anything under 75. So don't waste your time learning extra things that you don't need to know, because in the real world, we never, ever do property taxes. That is the assessor's job, and they're not going to allow us to even work that out. So let's just stick to what we need to make sure we pass. Okay? So it will always be 75 and above. Now, when a property is assessed at 75 and above, the rules are, when you're dealing with the school board, the exemption is $25,000. So you get exempt $25,000 from school board. All right. And then on non-school board, which is city and county, you get 50,000 exemption. Okay, this you have to know. You cannot, this you have to memorize, unfortunately. Okay, that's not something that you can figure out through just logic and things like that. You gotta know it. School board exemption for homestead is 25,000. Non-school board, meaning city and county, are 50,000. Okay, along with that, there are other exemptions that can be tacked on. For example, if the person is, let's say, exemptions, blind. If the person's blind, that's $5,000. If the person's a widow, that's $5,000. If the person is, let's say, totally and permanently disabled non-veteran, $5,000. So disabled, non-vet, another $5,000. So you got to be careful whenever they're telling you the problem. If they say Ricky is a homeowner where their home was assessed at 225,000 and Ricky is blind and a widow. Well, when I do my calculations, I already know that I'm going to get these exemptions based on the homesteader rule. But at the same time, through the homestead, since I'm blind and a widow, I'll get an extra 5,000 and 5,000 on exemptions. So that has to be added in there. Okay?
Could you,
Yep, go ahead.
could you tip the board a little bit forward towards you to get rid of the,
Well,
no.
that work?
The head, I mean, from the head, tip it towards you a bit.
I can't because there's a lock. It'll keep swinging.
Oh,
So
okay, all right.
yeah.
That will take care of the reflection.
Now,
That's
yeah,
okay.
it would, but unfortunately, I mean, yeah.
That won't do it. It's the board, though. The computer won't do it.
But are you able to see it? Because I can move it so the reflection moves.
That's good, thanks.
Okay, cool. So this may be for, okay. So anyway, so those are gonna be your other exemptions aside from your 25 and 50. Okay, so now we're gonna have to figure out and do some problems to make sure that we can figure out our property taxes. Okay, now, when we're doing property taxes, there's another thing we have to understand. The tax rate, it is expressed as a mill. Okay, your tax rate is not just whatever, you know. So a mill is 1/1000th of a dollar. The reason for that is they cannot charge you directly $1 per every whatever. So they base it off a mill. So now the way this works, anytime you see the word mill, you're going to take and divide it by 1,000. That's my trick. And the minute that you see where they sell, oh, county school board taxes are 6 mills, well, that's 0.006. You put in your calculator 6 divided by 1,000 since the word mill was there. And whatever comes out in your calculator, that is what you're going to use to calculate and figure out the totals. Okay, so let's do an example so we can kind of put it all together. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm not going to erase everything. I'm going to erase the exemptions and then I'll do the calculations just like I have it here so then we can kind of put it all together. Okay, so first things first. Let's say it says the home is assessed at 180,000. The owner has qualified for a homestead exemption. The county tax rate is 9.5 mils. The city tax rate is 8 mils. And the school district rate is 5.5 mils. How much will the property owner be charged for the property taxes? Okay, so they just told us, and again, I'm going to write it right here. What do they tell us that the property was assessed at? 180,000. So that way, right away, we know we're above 75. So full exemptions apply. Okay. So then what do they say on our school boards was?
35,000.
No. What is the tax rate based on the problem? Okay, so we're on page 412, by the way, guys, in case you wanna look at it.
Oh, 410.
No, school rate is 5.5 mils. 5.5 mils. Then city is,
9.5.
nope, that's county. City is 8 mils. And then county is 9.5 mils. Okay, so what did I just tell you? Anytime that you have the word mils. Nope, cannot multiply it, because then you're gonna get a ridiculous number and your problem's gonna be way wrong. Divided by 1,000. So that way, divided by 1,000, divided by 1,000, and divide by 1,000. So that's gonna give you 0.0055. That is going to give you 0.008. And that is going to give you 0.0095. And those are the figures that I'm going to use to calculate my tax rate. So now I gotta go one by one and working these out. So now what I need to do is I start with my assessed value. Here's my equation already. Remember, also, let me ask you guys this, guys. So let's say I don't file for my homestead exemption. Right? So if I don't file for my homestead exemption, what is the relationship between the assessed value and the taxable value?
Goes up,
How can it go up?
well, because, well, what you're gonna be charged it'll just be, there won't be any exemptions.
So therefore,
You're paying just the rate, the full rate.
what is the relationship between assessed and taxable value?
The assessed is the actual.
It's the same.
Correct.
Yeah.
So therefore, they're the same. They're the exact same, because if this is 0 and there are no exemptions because I don't file, then assessed value is taxable value. And the reason I mentioned that is because that was a question on my exam. They may ask, they may say, Ricky is thinking of or buying a property or bought a property that he wasn't able to do his tax exemption. And he needs to get, the assessor is going to now prepare the property taxes for the year. Under that scenario, what is the following? And they could say, assessed value is taxable value. B, assessed value is tax rate. C, assessed value is property taxes due. You need to understand that if I didn't file, because again, it's an application-based exam. It's not gonna be as simple as what is this? You have to think, oh, I didn't file for homestead exemption, so therefore I get no exemptions. And if I don't get any exemptions and I can't subtract, and I subtract 0 from the assessed value, the taxable value or the value that I'm gonna be taxed on are the exact same thing. So therefore, assessed value is taxable value. That's the train of thought you need to be having when you're solving these questions out. And I'm gonna keep trying to beat it into your heads if I can. Okay? So now, let's go through our process. What the problem told us, our assessed value is 180. So we start with 180,000, which is the assessed value. So now, for the school board taxes, or what are the exemptions?
The 50 and the 25.
For school board taxes, what are the exemptions here? Correct, 25,000. So therefore, what's my taxable value? 5, 1, 3, yep. So $155,000. So meaning that my tax rate now is gonna be based off 155, not 180. Because I just saved on 25,000 for the school board. So now that I have my taxable value, what is my tax rate for the school board? do you mean 852? No, my tax rate. Correct, so it's gonna be 5 mils. So since I already divided it by 100 or 1,000, I gotta use and multiply by the tax rate, which is 0.0055. And that is going to give me a total of 852.50. Now, guys, also, I know you have the book in front of you. Try to pay attention because the book can get confusing. This is very simple as long as you guys understand. And then you can kind of put the logic together. So based on my school board taxes, I'm paying $152.50 just on school board taxes. Okay, but now I have non-school board taxes, which are city and county. And they told us that city is 8 mils. And county is 9.5 mils. Now, since both of these are technically the same exemption of 50,000, I can combine the tax rate and do them together. Okay, so under this condition, I can go and say, what's my total? Well, it's gonna be 17.5 mils, which if I divide by 1,000, is going to give me 0.0175. Okay, so that's the number I'm gonna use. Now I repeat the same process. I take my 180 minus, what are my exemptions? Correct, 50,000. So now I'm getting taxed on $130,000 for school board and for city and county. So now I multiply by my combined tax rate, because I could do this separate, but I'm combining them to make it easier on myself. 0.015175. So once I multiply now, my 130 times 0.0175, I get 22.75. Okay? So what do I have to do to answer the question? Correct. So now you add the school board plus the county to get your total taxes. Okay, so then you add them together, you're gonna get 3127.50. So whenever you get your bill at the end of the year, and you look at the bottom, it's gonna say 3,127.50 due by November 1st. Payable November 1st. So that's gonna be your total property tax bill. And that is how they work it out.
That would be one of the numbers in the answer. They don't round it up. It would be exact, 3127.50.
It has to be exact. Because it's a tax. Okay, now guys, when we work in these problems for taxes, if you start to get long decimals, keep the long decimals until you get to the very end. Once you get to the very end is when you round, because when the answers are very close, sometimes in cents. If you round too early, you're gonna screw up your answer. So only round at the end. Do not round throughout. Okay, guys? So now let's do another example. Okay, now this one, I'm not gonna use a book example so you guys cannot cheat. But we're gonna work it out together. Okay, so if you wanna get out your calculators, you wanna, so we can work it out all together. So now let's propose a scenario. Let's say now that the property assessor says that a property in Ocala, Florida, Marion County, receives an assessed value of $388,000, okay, with a let me put it, let me rephrase it. Let's say Magda is, getting a property assessed, and the appraiser has determined that her property is assessed at 380,000. The school board taxes are, let's say, 6 mils. The county is gonna be 8.5 mils. And then city is gonna be 7 mils. Also, the problem tells us that Magda is blind and a widow. So usually whenever right away, the minute I see blind, I see widow, I'll start writing him in. Blind, 5,000, and widow, 5,000. That's just so I don't forget. Because when I start solving these things out, I mean, sometimes I may not check the problem and I may miss, and then again, if you forget one and do the whole calculation, that answer could be right there. If you miss both of them, that answer could be right there too, because they'll put the most popular ones. So now what do we do, guys? What do her property taxes do? So now what do we do here?
Take the 388.
So we take the 388 and do what?
We, take the minus, yeah.
Take the regular school board. That's gonna be, 25. Oh, it's just 6 mils, so this would be.
And then plus the 10 minus the.
Correct. So realistically speaking, it's gonna be 35,000 that we're gonna get exemption on. So out of 35,000, that is going to be 380 minus 30 is gonna be 58 minus 5 is gonna be 53. So 353. Right?
Is that 385 and 355?
385.
Oh,
That-
380.
No, I'm sorry, 388. I'm sorry, 388. I apologize. So 388 minus 35,000. That's gonna give me 353 is my taxable value. Okay? So now, what do I do?
Middle portion and the-
So what is my meal portion?
6.
So what do I write in here? 0.006, correct? And now, multiply that times 0.006. That'll give me 2118. Okay? So that's my school board taxes. Now I go off and I go to city and county. What is my city and county? 7 and 8.5. So 7 plus 8.5, that is going to give me 15.5 mils. Once I divide it by 1,000, that will give me 0.0155. Okay, now I repeat the same process. 388 minus my 35,000, which is what we had here. Right? I'm just not gonna write it all out now, since I wrote it right here. I'm just gonna write it as 35 for the sake of simplicity. Okay, guys? Don't get confused, please. So 353. Oh, no, I'm sorry. What did I do wrong?
You're messing up.
Correct. So what is it?
You take the 0.155.
Nope. What did I do wrong?
Not, why do you have
multiply instead of
35,000
dividing.
there?
Nope.
You subtract it. Yeah, you plus instead of
Hmm?
plus.
What do you mean I plus?
Where's the?
You keep using the assessed value, that's why.
Say what?
You're still using the assessed value for that.
Well, you have to use the assessed value first. That's the first step in the equation.
I know, but you're still using it you
That's
still
what I meant.
continue using it.
What do you mean?
Oh, never mind.
Okay, so where I messed up, guys, is that the exemption amount for non-school board taxes for city and county is not 25, it's 50. Correct, good job. Way to catch it.
Was he?
Correct. So that way, so how much am I really getting an exemption for?
330.
338.
Nope,
No, it'd be 333.
nope.
Oh,
What am I missing?
The blind.
So therefore, how much is my real exemption? It's not 50,000.
don't, I thought you had to combine that. together with the other.
50,000 plus 10,000.
So therefore, what's my total exemption? Correct, 60,000. Because essentially I'm getting 50 minus 5,000 because they're blind, minus 5,000 because they're widow. So it's a total of 60,000 that I get a full exemption. So if I take out 60,000 from 88, I get 328. So my taxable value on city and county is actually 328, not 338, because I gotta add the blind and the
I
Widow.
thought we did that separate on the one before, like, and then at the end, we. Okay.
what do you mean? How can we do a separate? Because that's an exemption.
Well, no, So I was categorizing in my brain, because I knew 25 and 50, and then I thought we were figuring those up separate and then taking, but yeah, you can do that. way.
Well, no, they're all exemptions. You have to group them together. You cannot put them anywhere else because it's gonna throw off the math. You have to use the exemptions where they go. That's why the
You go
equation is
from
that.
This side and then bring it over to that side.
No, well, you don't bring nothing over. It just goes
No,
where it
in my
goes.
mind, It's like you're bringing it over, because it's like this, we already figured out school board.
Yeah, but school board and county and city are completely separate. They don't necessarily, all you're doing is just adding them together at the bottom, but you have to work them out separate because the one, it has nothing to do with the others.
I got it now.
Because for example, in real life, if you live in county and not city, you're not paying city taxes, you're only paying county. So everything is independent of each other. The only way we can add these is because no matter what, the taxable value will always be the same for county and city. That's the only reason we can combine the tax rate. Because if I did them separate, we will always get 328. Okay? So now what do? By what?
Right, because you do the city plus county, so it's the 8.5 plus 6.
Okay.
No, it's right. Oh, no, 7, my bad.
So it's 15.5.
So therefore, what do I use to calculate?
Well, you use the total of your.
So give
mills.
me the number.
Oh,
So it's 8.5 plus, no, it's the 7 plus the 8.5, which is a 15.5 mils, which you would times it 0.0155.
All right, so what I'm asking is 0.0155. If you multiply by 14.5, you're gonna get completely wrong. You always, anytime you see mills, you have to divide it by 1,000. Without exception. Okay? Because a mill is 1/1000th of a dollar. That's what they're taxing you on. Okay? So now after I multiply my 328 times my 0.00 or 0.0155, I get 5,084. So my total property tax bill is gonna be 5084 plus 2118, 7202. So I owe $7,000, 7,200 for property taxes for the year. Now I ask you guys, if somebody says to me, we're working with an investor or a home buyer, let's say I'm working with you guys, and you tell me, oh, Ricky, that's wonderful that I get to say that I get to save some money if I do my homestead. How much do I save though? What's my savings? So what is my saving? What do you guys think? How do I calculate the savings?
You did a percentage, so. I wasn't so tired, I think.
You technically take like the 353 or the 328 and then multiply that by whatever percentage, right?
But that's what we're doing.
But
But-
I'm saying for the homestead, to put it.
You just take out, well, then just, Okay, you just said,
Wait, so you're going, oh, you get a discount off of the total that you're already paying right there, right?
you take.
Because if it's your primary residence, you're getting a percentage, because that's.
Correct, I'm already getting my discounts right here. 25,000, so 35,000 and 60,000. That's my exemptions. So how do I figure out savings? So let's think it logically. What am I saving? 35 and 50.
Right.
Take your exemptions as a total, multiply by the tax rate, and that is the savings. Because that's what you're missing from here, is that amount. Because if that wasn't there, you would just multiply this by the 388. But since you deducted that, you got the we multiplied it by this. If you multiplied it by this and subtracted that from this, you'll get the savings. But the easier way is just take whatever exemptions you have or the savings that you get, multiply it by your tax rate, and voila, that's what you just saved. Because that's what you didn't multiply in the equation, you removed it. Does that make sense, guys? So just in case they ask, what is your savings? Then you will multiply the tax rate by whatever your exemptions are on both ends and add them together, and that is your total savings on the transaction. So in this particular case, let's try to do it real quick. So we take 35,000 and we multiply it by 0.006, that gives us 210. 210 in savings. And then we take 60,000, which is a total exemption, and we multiply it by our 0.0155. That gives us 930. And we take 930 plus 210, that gives us 1140. Now, if we take 7202 and we add 1140, we should have paid 8342 for our property tax bill, but since we have our homestead exemption, we saved almost $1,150 on the tax exemption. So we're paying 7202 instead of 8340, which is what we should have paid if it was an investment property or wasn't homesteaded.
And this is something that you have to get in contact with an assessor.
No. You can look at it right in your tax bill.
So how do you like make something your homestead?
Just go to property appraisers. There's a form to file for homestead, fill it out and send it and you're in. Simple as that. Because all you're doing is claiming your residence as your primary residence. That's all you're doing. That is what homestead is. It's telling the government or the state, I live here, so protect my home. Because we're gonna go over some of the benefits later. Okay, guys? Everybody good on figuring out property taxes? For the most part, I know it's a little bit involved, but as long as you kind of get the idea of how the formula works, you'll be able to extract the answers. Because again, they gotta give you the assessed value and they gotta give us our tax rates. Then from there, the only thing we really need to know is the exemptions. 25 for school board, 50 for non-school board, which is city and county, as well as blind is 5,000, widows 5,000, totally and permanently disabled non-veteran is 5,000 more.
So we have to join the veteran.
Say what?
Isn't it?
Well, the veteran discount-
Yeah.
Correct. The veterans are completely exempt, right? That are totally and permanently disabled. That's why I don't even touch it up. Because we don't have to use that calculation. They just exempt. Okay, so make sure you know how to do this, guys. Please, that's gonna be part of your exam. All right,
Where is the website again to claim for any of those exemptions?
go to Google and put Marion County Property Appraisers.
You can just call your tax assessor collector.
You can do that too. Correct. So, okay, guys, everybody good with that? I mean, I know, like I said, it's a little involved. You're gonna have to practice, but that is the gist of it all. Try to keep to the logic and do that portion, okay? So next, we're gonna move to essentially save our home and portability. Okay, so these are gonna be the features or the benefits of the tax exemption from the homestead. Okay, so essentially, whenever we file the homestead, yes, we do get those exemptions from school board and city county, But at the same time, we get what is called save our home and portability. What that means is that whenever your property taxes are assessed and you're homesteaded, they cannot exceed 3% on the following year. So imagine if, let's say, taxes for your area went up 5%, well, you're capped at 3. Boom, you cannot go higher than 3. Then the next year, let's say they went up 6%, you're still capped at 3. So that way you're saving, now you're starting to compound savings through taxes because your homestead is keeping you low. You're not keeping up with the market and paying what the market is paying because you're homesteaded. The cool part is you only have to file once and then it stays homesteaded forever until you swap it or sell the house. So then that is the benefit, that you're capped on your tax rate or your tax amount up to 3% every year. The cool part is they also have a thing called portability. Does anybody know what portability means or is? Anybody ever heard of it?
No, I'm just thinking about moving a mobile home somewhere. that you have.
So essentially, when you port something, what are you doing?
Should be somewhere.
Correct. You're transferring it elsewhere. That is the exact same thing with your taxes. Now, if you buy another property and you claim that property as your homestead exemption, your savings or your portability transfers to the new property regardless of where you go. So now you don't lose your savings and have to start over. And you keep going with those savings. But the trick is you have to call the appraiser's office and request that. Because after a certain amount, like 2 or 3 years, you lose it. And now you have to start from scratch. So if, let's say now you forget, now you go buy elsewhere and you don't bring that over, now you're gonna be paying regular tax rates for that property. When you should port it, and now you get the savings in your new home, regardless of where it is. A lot of people don't know about portability.
Now, does it have to be within the same state though?
No, anywhere in the United States that you claim your primary residence. It's gotta be homesteaded. Correct. A lot of people don't know about that. Those are little things that as agents, we provide value for our customers, our investors and things like that, because now we have information to help them. Listen, whenever you buy this next property and we sell the next one of the benefits is that is that you're living in it, we'll make sure to transfer the homestead so that way you get your save your home and portability benefit. Are you familiar with your save your home and portability benefit? Now you're an educator. Now you put yourself in an authoritative position because you're delivering information that the customer doesn't know that is going to benefit them and provide them value. So now you're gaining on the credibility that you can bring to your customer, which will now put you in a position where they'll start trusting you more because they see that you know. When you start telling people things that they're not aware of, that is going to benefit them, you start being put in a position of more power and more authority. And when people see you as an authoritative figure, they listen. They're more predisposed to listen to instructions and follow along because you're a credible source. Now, correct, especially in this industry, the more you learn, the more you earn here. So also, they stopped listening to Johnny up in, Kansas, telling them that they should buy at this price because they sell over there at that whatever price. Every market is different. You cannot listen to somebody that bought years ago per se at a completely different market and now expect that it's going to work out in this way. Plus, who knows when they bought it? Maybe it was the 2020 pandemic when everything was amazing and the interest rates were on the ground. You never know. So that's why the more knowledgeable that you can seem, the more a customer is going to now follow your guide because they know you know. But if they think you're not sure, or you don't know, that's when now they'll start checking with other people that supposedly have done things, but have done them in different places at different times, and now they give them bad advice, and customers start to do erratic decisions and start taking erratic actions when they're following guidance from somebody they think that knows when in reality does not know. We're the knowledgeable ones. We're the professionals. We have to make sure that we can educate that and communicate that And also let people bring it up. I bring it to people all the time. I said, look, before you do anything, please let me know. Because, and then I create the scenario just in case it happens. Now the customer can say, oh yeah, Ricky told me that. Because if I didn't say anything, they won't think it and they'll do it. So if I already know that's something that they could do, I'm always going to pre-create that scenario and put it in their heads before it happens. So I can save the trouble of now having to fix the problem after they do it. Put it through this way. Whenever I've had to do this before, I've texted people real quick before they do anything, and I've had people tell me, oh, I was just getting ready to do that. It's like, oh my God, like, so, but ultimately, you know, you gotta let people know.
So my friend in Texas who's selling her house to move here, she would have like, what, you have like. how
2 to 3
many-
years. So whenever she comes and buys, whenever she gets her homestead accepted, because she has to file for the homestead, which at this point, when she moves, she's not gonna be able to file and it won't apply till next year because it happens in March. So now whenever actually the homestead applies, then, and she official with the homestead and they've approved her, then she can call the property appraiser's office for whatever county she's on, let them know that she just recently homesteaded her property and she wants to bring her portability from her previous homesteaded property. And they should be able to either explain whatever guidelines they are from state to state. I'm not 100% sure the details of it. I just kind of have an idea of how it all works. Okay. So next, now we're gonna look at the Florida's Greenbelt Law. Okay. So whenever you think of Greenbelt Law, what does green mean? Think of agriculture. Green. So essentially the Greenbelt Law, what it does is it prevents taxes to go up for farmers. Because for example, if you own farmland and there's development coming towards you, area has to be rezoned for residential. So now when you have a residential property, because based on the use of the property, we'll have higher taxes or lower taxes. So residential properties, commercial properties, and things like that end up having higher taxes because it's an improvement in potential income producing property. So therefore, whenever you're farming and the area is starting to increase, the Greenbelt Law protects the farmers from the increase in property taxes, and it allows them to stay low since they are not going to be building residential properties. They're going to continue to farm the land. So that's what that rule is for. Okay, guys? That's all you need to know there. Next, we're going to now have to look at special assessments. What did we say special assessments were? Okay. And what is an assessment? It's a tax. Okay. So it's a specific tax. And what does the special assessment relate to? Improvements to the area, the streets, and things like that. So the example that you're gonna get tested on is gonna be paving of the roads. So whenever let's say you live in a dirt road, and now the city or the county are gonna go ahead and pave it, the homeowners also have to contribute towards the construction or the paving of that particular road. Okay, so they now impose what they call a special assessment to the property or a tax, so the homeowner can also contribute their share. Okay. Okay, so here's what I'll do. I got it. So next, now we're gonna look at the street paving assessment. So it's gonna be street pavement assessment. And again, what is assessment? A tax. Okay, so now the question says, the city is paving the streets in a neighborhood. The city will assume 30% of the expense. So city is covering 30% of the expense of the project. Now they're saying the city has approved a bid to pave the street at a cost of $24 per square foot. So $24 per square foot, or I'm sorry, per front foot. My apologies. Make sure you read properly, guys. Because there's square feet and front feet. Per front foot. And now they're telling me too that how much is a special assessment for lot A that measures 100 by 125? So lot A measures 100 feet by 125 feet. Okay? How much is the assessment? All right, so now let's look at logic. Now, just so you guys are aware, okay, you need this piece of information. Anytime you have the dimensions of a property, right? Because this is 100 feet by 125 feet. So the property is actually a rectangle. Okay? The first number is always the front footage. The first number is always the front footage. Hence why the number is in front, meaning that is what is attached to the road. That's what is known as front feet. So this particular property, and imagine this is the road. Okay? This is gonna be 100 feet by 125 feet. So this will be the shorter, this will be the longer, it'll be almost a square. It'll be a little bit long rectangle, since that one's a little longer. So this is always my front feet. Everybody good with that? Okay. So now, first things first, what do we have to do? Okay, guys, but let's try to use a little logic and not read, because otherwise it's gonna make it harder for you guys to remember. So meaning, we gotta figure out how much, we gotta multiply the front feet, like she says, by the $24 per front feet. So now we take our 24 times 100. What do we get? $2,400. So that means this project for this person is gonna cost $2,400. Now what? What do you guys think will be next? The city is covering 30% of the project. So what must I do next? Nope. How can I divide it if they're covering 30%?
I'm just saying, out of the 2,400, you have to figure out, so, I mean, the city covering 30%.
So therefore, what do I do? Right. So what do I multiply? By? Nope. How much am I paying? No, this,
That's 60%, right? 70.
correct. If I'm paying 70%, the city's paying 30, how much am I paying? Correct, so I multiply by 0.7, which is the amount that I'm gonna pay. Okay, so if I multiply 24 feet by 0.7, I get 1680. Now, is that my answer? What is the answer then?
That's what you're paying. So then,
Yeah, they're saying, how much am I paying? Well, now this is where the little trick comes in. Now, let's look at logic. If they're telling me that I'm covering, because if we multiply by 100, these are other properties. Right? This is lot A, lot B, another neighbor, lot C, another neighbor. So I'm paying here, right? I'm paying from here to here, correct? As I multiply by my 100 by 24. That means that that the $24 are covering this portion. The neighbor has to cover their portion, the other neighbor has to cover their portion, because why would I pay for the neighbors? Right? It's not my responsibility to pay for neighbors.
so you guys are individually, like, basically reimbursing, or, yeah, you guys are paying out of that 1,600, your percentage of that 1,600, right? Because all you guys are paying a total of the project, and all the residents are getting charged. for
Correct,
the
correct.
area.
I'm only paying for my property.
Right, exactly. So if you're only paying for that, you're paying a percentage of the 1600 rate.
Well, no. I mean, I already paid for the 100 feet that my property belongs to. How can I pay a percentage?
You know,
Correct.
They divide it by two because the person across gonna pay for the halfway for that as.
What about the neighbor in the front? They gotta pay too. So then you gotta divide it by two. Because why would you pay their portion of the road? You're only paying half the road and to your property line. This is what you're paying. So you always have to divide it by two because somebody else is attached to the road as well. Whether it's a neighbor or whether it's an empty field or something, the city then pays that portion. We're only responsible for what is within our property line and half the road, because across the way, there's another property that's attached to the road as well. So the answer is 840. Make sense? So now be careful, guys, because your problem is gonna have, these are gonna be your answer choices. Be whatever.
920.
Correct. So, okay, so that's what it was, 920. Okay, so that's gonna be your answer choices. So regardless of what you look at. Because and then you gotta look at what they're asking. Because they could ask on the problem, what is the price of the total project? 2,400. Okay, what is the price for, let's say, the total of your property line? 1680. What is your price? 840. Okay, so just be careful what they ask. But that is as difficult as these are gonna get, guys. All you have to do, the city, dollar per front foot, and they gotta give you the dimensions. You take the front number, multiply by whatever the front foot is, that gives you the 2,400. Then, whatever the city's covering, you're paying the other side. I mean, you could do the two-step process of multiplying by 0.3 and subtracting it from the 2,400, however you want to do it. I always think to myself, if the city's paying 30, I'm paying 70. So that's what I need to multiply. And then make sure that you divide it by 2 so you're not covering your neighbor's portion. So it's 840. And that's how it'll always be, guys. All right? Everybody good with this? Yes? Okay. So next, we're gonna look at federal income taxes, okay? Now, when it comes to federal income taxes and the taxes that we pay to the government, just know these particular items. That's gonna be on page 419. I already put them in your study guide, but make sure you know them. Mortgage interest is deductible from your property taxes. So any interest that you pay on your mortgage, you can deduct it from your property taxes. The government will send you I forget what the form is called, that they, so you can send it, give it to your CPA, and they can deduct it. Property tax is deductible also. So any property taxes are deductible. IRA withdrawals for first-time home buyers is deductible. Also, exclusions from the gain of the sale of a principal residence, meaning if you have capital gains tax. Does anybody know what capital gains tax is? What is it?
When you earn, I think when you earn money, before, I don't know how to explain. Sorry.
So you were doing good when you earn money, but what is when you earn money, but you have a profit on the sale? So anytime you have a profit on the sale and you make money, like you said, you earn or make money on a property, the government is gonna want their cut. So then they're gonna want their capital gains tax, because a capital gain, a real estate property is a capital asset. It's categorized as a capital asset. So the government is gonna want a percentage of any profit that you made on the deal. How do we get around that? Does anybody know? Or how do we shelter it? That's what you call tax sheltering.
Buy another property right away.
Yes, the issue is you have to know, you have to use specific mediums. Depending how you transact, because if you transact as an individual, what must you do? You gotta use what they call a 1031 exchange account. If you do that, then you can defer the taxes. If, let's say, you transact as a business, now you may not need a 1031, but now you have to move the money quickly. But you gotta get with an accountant to make sure that you can get that done properly based on how do you transact as a person or as an entity, and how to go about it. Okay, also, but
Is it 1031 the number of the form?
that is the tax code, the
Yeah.
paragraph or the chapter or whatever on the tax code. So it's like, it is section 1031 of the tax code, blah, 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 blah. Okay? So, and usually on those, and we'll cover it another thing might be in this chapter possibly, another chapter, but either way. Essentially the way that works is you have to open up a separate account. And the way the government structure it, somebody has to handle that account. And the purchase needs to go through that specific account, so that way you can now be able to shelter those taxes. So then the way it works is the government gives you 6 months. 3 months to locate the property and 3 other months to close on the property. If you've gone through that account, and then when you receive your profit, within those 6 months, you bought another one, now you pay no taxes. It just gets deferred and you keep moving.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know a guy who took his, 401 or his IRA, just ended up buying a property, but he can't live in it, but he can use, so he doesn't, have to pay penalties. And if he just rents it out and then everything, he expenses it out, then he doesn't have to pay penalties.
Correct. Now, and the important part is when he sells it. Because if you use a 1031, when he sells the property, whatever profit he makes, he's going to now have to reinvest. So that way he doesn't have to pay those taxes. Yeah, because if you don't sell it, you'll never earn the profit. You have to sell it.
Because you said if you're already earning profit on the property, but then you're selling it to get more profit out of it, right?
No. But the thing is, the property, when you are earning the property and you're not selling it,
Yeah.
that's not a capital gains tax.
And you can't use that money for yourself, it has to go back into the stay back in that account. That's what
Correct.
you do.
So essentially, you can keep that money.
But it's not for you to use.
No, you can use it. The thing is, don't confuse the income you earn on your business with the actual profit that you make from the sale of your business. 2 different things. So they're talking specifically on the profit that you make on the sale. Let's say you bought the business for 200,000, now you're selling it for 400. Well, you just made 200,000 profit, regardless of the income you made throughout. That 200,000, the government says, I want a percentage of, because you made money on the property, on the
But if
sale.
you reinvest before the 6 months. then-
As long as you use a 1031 account. You have to use the account, and the money has to come from that account and go directly to title, otherwise you're paying taxes.
So how do you, wait, so what if you're not, like, what exempts you from using that 1031? Like,
Nothing
that's
exempts you.
when you use that every
That's what you
time.
have to use every single time,
Okay.
otherwise you're paying taxes.
But there's another one you can use.
If you own a business, if you're buying the property through your business, you may not need the 1031 because business taxes is different than personal tax. So transacting as a business or an LLC gives you different options when it comes to taxes, that if you are Robert, what's your last name? Irizarry. So if Robert Irizarry has to do their taxes separate than if Robert Irizarry owned Robert Irizarry LLC. Robert Irizarry LLCs has different tax rules than Robert Irizarry by himself. Or, no. The 1031 is if you're using personal, but if you're using as a business, it is a business.
I understand that. So if you're using it personal, then it's separate.
Correct. And if you're using it as a business, you can use a 1031 through a business, but business has more flexibility. You don't have to go through 1031 to still shelter it. There's other options, because business tax is different than personal tax. That's why the economy is built to transact and do taxes through businesses. That's why the rich don't own anything. The rich don't own nothing on their name. Everything is owned by trusts, by companies, by LLCs, because their tax rules are different than our tax rules. We get screwed. Personally, businesses get a lot of tax benefits. And as long as you know how to structure your stuff, you're practically paying no tax. As long as you move everything when you're supposed to, and you know what I mean, you keep to the rules of the tax code.
Yeah, we as a corporation, I think I only had 1 year where I really paid tax.
Yeah, I mean, we can deduct a lot of things. We can do all kinds of different things. We're gonna do cost segregation studies where we can take 1 year's depreciation and multiply by 7 and not have to pay 7 years worth of depreciation on day one. Yeah, investors do that all the time. They save themselves hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then what they do is next year they buy another property and repeat the cycle every year. And they just keep getting richer by not paying taxes. They use those taxes that would have paid to buy other properties and keep growing their portfolio and not have to pay that. Right. But these are the things that we as people don't know. We have to learn how to do these things and understand. But the problem is a lot of poor people don't want to pay the professionals that actually know how to do those things. People want to cheap out and pay their CPA $100, $150, $200. Yeah, that person was only going to file your taxes. They're going to tell you cannot do all these things. But the people that actually want to make money and save money pay prime dollar for a professional. Hence why rich people, accountants, charge them tons of money because they save them tons of taxes. I literally had this conversation with an investor today that they're complaining because the property, once the property sells, they're going to make 150,000 profit. They don't want to pay property taxes, but their accountant is telling them that they're probably going to have to pay because that accountant is not a type that is going to now explore the tax code and look for exemptions, credits, and things and work things out. That's what my accountant told me. My accountant said there's two types of accountants in today's society. The ones that stick by the book, the cookie cutter ones, they don't want to learn the tax code. They just want to file. They're cheap because they're going to do just the basic filing of paper. That's your H&R blocks, your ATAGs, your traditional CPAs. Now, good CPAs are going to understand your business, and they're going to now be able to create options based on the rules of the tax code for you to not have to pay more taxes, even though you may have made way more money. Okay, for example, my father, before we had the business and we did all this, he used to pay $1,500 a year. Now he makes back $1,600 a year because now he has business, and my accountant gets all the deductions and works it in, does this, does that. We can probably pull from here, we can pull from there, we can do this, we can do that. And now my aunt, she used to pay $200. Now she gets $2,500 back because she's part of the business. And when we transact with a business, and you have an accountant that can know the tax code and can learn the tax code and use the tax code to your advantage, is gonna be the difference. But if I did it the traditional way, I'm paying money, but how much do you think the accountant is charging us to do that? At least.
Yep.
Correct. It's expensive, but you save taxes. Correct. So that's the thing. You pay for what you get, or you get for what you pay. People don't like to pay for the people that make them money.
So as a homeowner, you don't, it's essential to have an account.
Well, I mean, of course, if you're an entrepreneur and you're a business owner and stuff,
Have a W-2, then obviously.
yeah, it's just simple.
That's-
At that point, that's your only income. You just need to file.
Say she's like a big entrepreneur. She doesn't like to just stick to one thing. She has more, she does all that.
Okay, then she needs a great accountant then. She needs to invest in a good accountant because good accountants will take all of that and make her pay nothing.
Yeah.
Or very, very little.
Yeah.
Or even get money back, depending on, the business in itself. No, I mean, a lot of us are. The only reason I'm telling you this is because I'm going through it now.
Right.
I didn't have to work like do this before, but as an entrepreneur and investor, I'm always thinking, how do I save my money and not pay the government? Because ultimately, they provide us the rules. Here's your tax code. This is how you save money in everything imaginable. But who is now gonna sit there and study that so you can give people benefits? Good accountants. You know what I mean? But those accountants are not gonna charge you what the H&R Block accountant is gonna charge you.
Yeah, for my business and my personal, it was about $1,700 a year. It's
Correct.
not a corporation.
So in my case, for my dad, my aunt, myself in the business, I'm paying like 7,000.
How much of that do you see back?
My point exactly.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, I'm also paying that. I'm also paying that though, because he's structuring everything. So that way, the next years, everything is set up and it's just piling on top.
That's crazy.
Because the whole thing is now in the investor, in the point of the my investor career that I'm at a point where now I have to create other LLCs to separate my properties from the management of my properties. Meaning that if, let's say you have a rental, right? You have a rental property. Technically, you should separate the property from the management or the rental portion, because if one of the renters falls and sues you, the property is not within the management company. The management company is separate than the actual asset. Because if they're together, now they can take your property. But if I separate them and I have an LLC to manage all the properties, and each property has its own LLC, or they're on a separate LLC for just the ownership of the properties, if that homeowner sues me, they're suing the management companies, they're not touching the asset. Because they're technically separate companies. So essentially now, as you start your investing career and acquisition, you have to learn that's called asset protection and estate planning. That is when now you start building your trusts. You start creating the entities that own the properties, so you don't own anything under your name, but you control everything. That's how the rich stay rich. That's how you can go bankrupt and not lose your wealth. Trump's been bankrupt like 7, 8 times. But all you do is, if you structure your stuff correctly, you let the LLC go. It goes, you file for bankruptcy, but everything else you own is intact. And your personal don't really hurt because it's a business. So therefore, you almost get to throw away a property and still stay rich. That's how,
You're still losing out on something. Your assets aren't.
correct. You just go bankrupt on whatever the LLC is, and then they'll say, okay, you went bankrupt. Yeah, but you have so much things that you're still rich as hell. Correct. So that's how the rich transact. You know what I mean? They don't own anything. Nothing's under their name. Everything's owned by trusts, which they are the beneficiary or the trustee that controls the trust. If they get sued, they're like, okay, sue me. I don't own anything. And they look up the record. Ricardo Valdez owns absolutely nothing. But the trust owns everything, all my wealth.
That's all your houses, your cars.
Because then you build an entire structure. You have your trust, you have your holding companies, you have your LLC, your management company, and everything. It's like a matrix. It's like an entire thing where you have, let's say, your trustee, and you have your holding company, and the holding company manages all the LLCs, and also it holds the management company. LLC 1 is your property blah, and it holds these properties. Then as you start acquiring more, it'll hold these properties, and it's an entire structure that you build out. So you protect your assets and you ensure that the liability that you have on the properties goes way down. And now when people try to sue you or get at you, or there's an issue, everything's so broken up and layered that they can't really access it.
Oh, that makes sense.
That's how the rich do.
Is that also applies to a regular home? You own that home?
Yeah.
And instead of adding, putting beneficiaries, their names, you have a trust.
Correct.
for that.
And
That
the
way,
trust
they-
owns the
something
property.
like-
Correct. You don't own it. You control the trust though. So you do whatever the heck you need to do within the trust, because you're just the beneficiary or the trustee that controls the trust. You're an employee. So essentially what you do is, in order to make your money, the trust pays you. You don't own it. You receive a payment for running the trust.
That's insane.
Correct, but that's all legal. That's the crazy part. But you have to know the rules. It's like when we play a game. It's all a game, guys. It's a puzzle. If you know the rules and know how to build the puzzle, we pay no taxes, or we pay very little. But the average Joe it doesn't learn these things. They don't teach us these things in school. They refuse to teach us these things in school because they don't want us to build wealth. You know, but the rich and the people that are already working it, they've learned the rules of the game, and they say, okay, so how can I play? Because let me ask you guys this, now that we're talking taxes, how did taxes come about? Because if you really think about it, taxes are unconstitutional.
Yeah, I was literally just talking about this a couple more ago.
Yeah.
Taxes originated because
For wars.
not only that, but it's like everybody that was coming from like off the coast, that was like out of the country, they were selling all their product in like the States, but they weren't benefiting the state of the country.
Well, that's a different type of tax, talking about income taxes and things like that. Essentially, the way it came about is that taxes were only levied during war times. Hence the term, no taxation without representation. That's where that came about, meaning if I'm paying you taxes, you better represent us as a public for specific things. If I don't know where my money's going, it's unconstitutional. Put it to you that way. So that was how it used to be. To the point that back in 1908, it went to Congress and the Supreme Court deemed taxes unconstitutional, and they removed them. The issue became, though, once now the Federal Reserve was trying to be put in place, okay? What ended up happening was they confused the population and tricked the population with the Robin Hood effect. So essentially they said, oh, we're only going to tax the rich. If you make a certain amount of money and up that you consider the rich, let's tax them. What do you guys think? Let's vote on it, population. So what do you think happened? Everybody say, yeah, we should tax the rich. They got money. Let's vote it in. And guess what happened once you guys voted in? It screwed everybody, because now by the population accepting taxes for the rich, it made it so it's constitutional. And now what ended up happening? It started trickling down. Once the government saw money, they got greedy, and now they wanted more. And they went to the middle class. And guess where it trickled down to? The poor, you know, the poor people. And now who pays the most? Because now what happens to the rich that originally were supposed to be taxed? The rich will pay John, that's an amazing accountant, say, John, you better study the crap out of that book because I'm not paying no taxes. That's why I'm paying you that money. Otherwise, I'm going to go get Charlie over there that knows his code. So then Johnny goes in and studies the book and say, okay, we could do this, and this, and now you don't pay taxes. Now the poor, on the other hand, are like, crap, here you go, government. Take my money. Correct. And the middle class, not as much, but the poor, actually, because W-2 pays the most taxes by far. Do you guys know why W-2 pays the most? Because you pay your money before you get to deduct it. So by the time you get your paycheck, the government already took their cut. 1099s and businesses get to deduct all their expenses before the government can now take their tax. So if you're multiplying, let's say 10% by 50, or the total amount of 200, you're going to pay way less after deduction. That's why you can get away with all this tax sheltering when you're transacting as a business or as a 1099 independent contractor. But you got to know how to move. And that's how all of this is structured, guys. Okay? So now, let's look at this portion. So now, we need to start understanding that, for example, a capital asset, a capital gain, adjusted basis. Now, the adjusted basis when it comes for tax purposes is anything you acquired plus all the money it costs you to acquire it and improve it. So your adjusted basis is your improvement, your closing costs, everything total, so that way you can depreciate it later. Okay, so just so you know, FERPTA is specifically for foreign nationals or foreign investors. So if you're you can invest in the United States from another country, but when you sell the property, you're supposed to pay taxes. But FERPTA rule states that if you don't have permanent residency, but you invest in the United States, they withhold 15% of the profit in case you don't pay your property taxes. Okay, that's all FERPTA is. Okay, so now we need to do the straight line method for depreciation for your property taxes. That is gonna be pretty much the last thing we do on this chapter. But yeah, bro, so just so you know, man, this is like, y'all getting a little crash course on the investor world too, within your real estate education. So hopefully you guys can start thinking a little bit different, and that's why I say and do the things that I say, because I'm living it, you know, and I'm learning a lot of things that we weren't taught, things that you don't even think about until you start getting to those levels. But if you know it now, once your mind can see a different vision and understand something above, it can never go back. But once you learn these things, you start thinking differently. You start evaluating situations differently, because you're like, okay, so if I used to do it this way and the rich do it that way, how can I now start gearing towards doing the same thing so I can keep my money and make more money? You know what I mean? Because all this tax sheltering and all the savings, you would have to reinvest now so you don't get hit with taxes. Because the minute that you keep it, it's deemed profit. Now you're gonna get hit with taxes.
You can even have an exempt status and not pay social security tax and start building your own social security. You know,
Correct. So now, guys, whenever we're working with depreciation for the sake of income taxes, remember, we looked at depreciation earlier. When do we look at depreciation? When we're doing the appraisals. So depreciation can work in many different angles. At that time, we were looking at depreciation for the sake of evaluating the value of the property. All right, we're looking for the value, so we need the depreciation to know how much it's worth. Over here, we're looking at depreciation, so we know how much we're paying in taxes at the end of the year. Okay, so the way that works is the government has deemed that for depreciating purposes on the income tax, any residential properties will have an economic life of 27.5 years. So that's going to be residential. So if it's a residential property, remember how we did the economic life is how long that property can depreciate for. Okay, same thing. Well, now for commercial is going to be 39 years. Okay, so 27.5 for residential and 39 years for commercial or non-residential. Okay, so now the way you do the straight line method to make sure that you can know how much you can depreciate in your income tax, first things first, you have to find how much the property cost you. So the property cost, how much it costs you to acquire it, okay? Then from there, you have to remove the value of the land. Why do you remove land? Why do you remove land, guys?
Because it's separate, that isn't that doesn't depreciate.
Correct, because we're looking for depreciation. Land doesn't depreciate. Remember when we looked at the cost depreciation, we had to add land after we figured out how much it depreciated, because land does not depreciate. So once we know how much the property costs and we remove the land, that will give us essentially what is called the depreciable basis, meaning the basis that I can depreciate now. That would be the equivalent of your taxable value. So depreciable basis, or what I can depreciate. What I can depreciate. Okay, then from there, once I have my depreciable basis, all I do is divide it by either the 27.5 or the 39, And that will give me my depreciation that I'll have to pay for the year, or I can deduct from my property taxes, or from my income tax, I'm sorry. So that will give me your annual IRS depreciation. Now, these two number, guys, you have to memorize. You have to know, because that is actual law for the tax code, just so you guys are aware. Okay, depreciation deduction. Now, what I was trying to tell you, Robert, was that what investors do is take that amount, multiply by 7, and deduct it off their taxes. Because the law, the tax code says that if you do a cost segregation study, you can deduct up to 7 years on year one, but you got to do it right at year one. So then what they do is, if let's say I'm paying, let's say my depreciation is 30 grand, multiplied by 7. That's $210,000 that you're saving. Now you take that $210,000 that you would have paid in profits, because you would have to make millions to have to pay that in taxes. Now you take that 210, put it into a deposit, a down payment for a new building. And then when it's time to do taxes again, that building, you just bought it year one. Now I repeat the process.
Probably you got the taxes.
Well, I already did on building 1, I already did the depreciation for 7, so I cannot do it over and over and over and over. But if I buy a new building with the savings of the 7 years, that building is for 1 year old when I first buy that second building. So I repeat that process, and with the savings, I buy a third building. I repeat that process, I buy a fourth building. And now I just keep buying every year, so that way I can do my cost segregation. You know, obviously there's different rules, guys. You know, if you know about that and I have little things wrong, excuse me, because I'm not an accountant. I'm just giving you the premise of how investors think, do things, and save taxes. Now, don't worry about that for the exam. I'm just giving you guys that so you guys are aware what a cost segregation study is. Okay? But essentially, let's look at an example now. Okay? So an example would be, in 2019, a duplex classified as a residential real estate investment was purchased for $250,000. So it was purchased at $250,000, and it's a residential. They're telling us also that the land value is 50. So land is 50. And then they just tell us the depreciable basis, whatever, what is the yearly depreciation deduction? So they're only gonna give us the purchase amount and the land. And then they're gonna give us a hint in the problem. What is the hint? What do we need to know how to calculate these? Well, aside from the formula. Nope. So what do we need to know to be able to calculate these? Once they give us the property cost, the land. No, but we have something missing. We need to know if it's a residential or a non-residential. Because that is gonna determine if we use the 27.5 or the 39 to solve the problem, one or the other. So in this case, it totals residential. The minute you saw residential, in your head should go 27.5. And just so you don't confuse depreciation, remember, this is strictly and only for income taxes. If it's anything away from income taxes, these 27 and 39 do not apply. Go with what they tell you on the economic life in the problem. Okay? So now, since they told us this, let's solve it out. So we have a property cost will be 250. Okay, I subtract the land, which is 50. So my depreciable basis, or what I can be depreciated on, is 200,000. What do we use? Correct. That divided by 27.5, and we get 72.73. So that means that I just saved or deducted $7,273 from my income taxes at the end of the year. Multiply by 7, now we're at 49,000 and change. Okay? So just keep that in mind, guys. Let's do one more real quick. So in 2019, a non-residential real estate investment property, what did that just told me right there? So therefore, now keep in mind, do not stick to commercial, because if it says industrial, then what do you do? If you've been thinking commercial the entire time, they never specify commercial in the book. What do they specify?
Non-residential.
Non-residential, so that means it encompasses many different things. Do not get locked in on commercial and commercial only. So put in your brains non-residential, so that way anything outside of residential, you know it's 39 years. Do not fall on the trick of putting commercial in your head, because that's not what his book is telling us. Okay, so let's look at it this way. In 2019, a non-residential real estate investment property, 39 years. Okay, purchased for $2,350,000. That's $2,350,000. Where land, I believe, is 250. So if land is 250, what's my depreciable basis? It's gonna be 2,100,000. And now I divide it by what? 39. So that means that I get 53,847, 846. So on the business side, I say 53 grand from my property. Now, the property was deemed $2.3 million. So that's a business, it's a good business. So you're saying 53,000. Now imagine if I bought that year one, multiply that by 7. I just saved close to $500,000, if not more. Actually, yeah. So now I used almost $500,000 by the other building, repeat the process and raise the recycle. You know, but again, there's more implications than just like that. I'm just speaking at it in the simplest form possible. But keep in mind that a lot of investors and people like that do these things. Okay, so now just to finish out the chapter, when you have a like-kind exchange, that is the 1031 exchange. So make sure you know that like-kind exchange, that is your 1031. So meaning you're buying a like-kind property. Okay, and they don't mean like-kind as if it's got to be the same type of property. They mean like-kind as if you're using the same money. Because now if there's a difference, let's say now that instead of you buying a property for, let's say you made 250,000 on that property, but let's say you bought a property for 230. Now that difference is called the boot, and that's what you pay taxes on. If there's any difference from the amount that you earn to the purchase of the next, that difference is called a boot. And you're going to pay taxes just on the boot because it's not the same that you earned. Okay, so just keep that in mind because that may pop up when it comes with the boot. All right, guys. So that is going to be chapter 18. Okay, taxes that affect real estate. Now there's going to be so many questions. Should be like 3 or 4. 3 questions.
Like you guys can even, we can even take this real estate school as a write-off. And, or, right, and the, use it if they're.
It can be, it can be.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's go to chapter. We still got 30 minutes. So let's try to knock out. Question, do you guys want me to keep, because technically we have another math chapter, which is closing disclosures. Okay, now I can start it right now. So at least over the weekend, you can kind of get working on this, which actually I'll do that because there's specific section on transfer taxes that I want to make sure. Yeah, go ahead. That I want to make sure you get working on. So when we come back on Monday and to finalize the class, we can start touching that logic and you guys have time to work it out because it can get a little confusing if you don't know the logic properly. And I want you guys to be able to practice it over the weekend. Because the other chapters, chapter 10 is not anything major. As soon as I explain it all, you'll be like, oh, okay, that's easy. And then the other chapters are real time. So we'll have, I think, 3 more chapters to finish out. 2 of the chapters are 1 question ones, and they'll take no time. And then chapter 10, and at least we'll start this one. Okay? So this is gonna be chapter 14, guys. Everybody go to chapter 14? Okay, so this is gonna be real estate related computations and closing of transactions. Okay, so now the very beginning of this chapter, I'm not gonna go over. They're going about how to convert decimal places to fractions and fractions to numbers. That's elementary. We're not gonna waste our time on that. So we're gonna begin, guys, on 338. 338. That's where we'll begin the chapter. Okay, let me ask you guys this. What is a proration? Proration. What is a proration?
Right, like, or is this talking about, say, when you have to prorate, somebody's rent, or you prorate?
But correct, but when you're prorating, what are you doing?
Your.
Assessing,
Hmm?
assessing.
No.
No.
No. What do you think? You try that.
You wanna try?
No, she don't try. You wanna try, go ahead. No, but I mean, you kind of get an idea, but just think logically. What is a
Yeah,
proration?
well, it's just like anything, if you're getting out of a contract early, or if you're moving in earlier than, like, say you have 30 days. And, you need to leave early, or you need to move in early, you take the amount of whatever you're paying monthly. And then you take, how many days, or the percentage of, the time, like, say, 15 days, will you have to take that amount, and then you, multiply, and then you minus,
So therefore, give it to me in just one sentence.
you're prorating your,
So she explained it correctly and gave me the entire long explanation with how to do it and its steps and all that stuff. But what in layman's terms, one sentence, what is a proration? Is divvying up a fee to the amount that you owe.
okay,
That's all a proration is breaking down a payment into what the exact amount that you owe, because like she said, if let's say you're gonna pay a month's rent is worth this much, but you live in it for 15 days. Are you gonna pay the full 30 days? No, you're gonna get prorated to the 15 days that you are living there, and that's what you're gonna pay. So you're divvying up the full fee so you can figure out what your portion of the payment would be. That is a proration. So therefore, in the instance of the closing disclosure, a proration is a fee that's divvied up between the buyer and the seller. For example, property taxes, because look at it this way. If let's say you own the property, Lisa, and property taxes, when do they begin?
they,
When do property taxes begin accumulating?
they want.
What date?
End of the month.
No.
Oh.
When are property taxes paid, guys?
Oh, April 1.
Like-
That's the.
No, so, okay, so
November,
property taxes are
November
paid how many times a year?
1,
So therefore, when does the year begin?
1.
Thank you. So property taxes begin January 1st.
Okay, it's
So
okay.
therefore, but that's why I'm trying to wake you all up. And trust me, you'll remember the more you struggle with this. So essentially, property taxes, since they're paid once a year, right? They're paid in arrears, one payment. And you owe the property, and let's say we close today. What's today? July 23rd. Okay? Now, the property taxes are due November 1st. So if we close today, is it fair that I have to pay the full bill at the end of the year when I've only lived in the property from today till the end of the year? So what must that entire bill be? What must we do with that whole bill? Prorated, so that way we figure out how long you lived in the property, how long I lived in the property, what the total bill is, and divvy it up so everybody pays their portion. So therefore, since both parties are involved with this fee, this is what you call a double entry. Because a closing disclosure, and I'm gonna show you guys this, just so you guys can make sense of it, because now we're gonna start dabbling into debits and credits. Okay, and I'm gonna share the screen with you guys real quick. Hold on. Hold up, guys. see, Alta. Up real quick. Okay. So essentially, let's look at this form. For those of you that have ever bought properties or have sold properties or things like that, you're gonna get before you close, you're gonna get a document that looks just like or something similar along these lines. Yeah, I'm gonna share my screen now. And if you guys cannot see this through the Zoom, please let me know so I can try to make sure that you guys can see it. Okay, this is okay. I know what happened. Sorry, you're seeing my other screen because you know how like when you mirror, you can like split the screens. So let me go ahead and go back. I was reading that book. Like I said, guys, I always stay studying and stay educating. Right now, I'm listening to a book called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. I just started that today. I just finished a book called Who Not How. Have you guys ever heard of that book before? So essentially, just the premise of the book, which is a pretty good hold on one second. Display. Okay. So essentially the book is called Who Not How. So meaning that the way we as people always think about whenever we have to accomplish something, first thought in our mind is what? How can I get this done? Well, the rich think, who can I find that already knows what to do so they can do it quicker than I could? And that's how they function. Anytime they need something, who can I find that already knows what I'm doing so then I don't have to now learn everything and do it from scratch. That's how entrepreneurs and rich people do it. So that's what the book is about, teaching you and getting you in the mindset of not thinking, how do I do it? As opposed to thinking, who can I find that can already learn, that already knows what I'm trying to learn, because that'll improve production.
You're not gonna be learning it.
Correct. By the time that I figure it out, who knows if the opportunity is still there. Okay. So now, guys, let's go ahead and look at this. So this is going to be our Alta. This is what a disclosure looks like when we're closing a deal. As you can see here, we have the purchase price, $489,900, $489,900. Now the buyer, on the buyer side, there's debits and credits. On the seller side, there's debits and credits. And all of these things, what does it say right there? Prorations, loan charges. These are all fees and things that we're going to have to know. For example, look, as agents, we want to look at what are the commissions, $14,697 each party. So ultimately, what are the transaction fees? That's what I want to know as agent. But for the sake of the exam, we have to know a lot more in detail and figure some of these numbers out. We won't have to do it in the real world, but we do have to do them for the exam. Not all of them, not everything that you see here, just specific ones. Okay, so now whenever I say debits and credits, this is what I mean. It's all on paper. Okay, everybody clear on that? It'll make more sense as we keep going. Okay, so you're good there. Zoom, if you have any questions, please speak up because we're going to get into it. Okay, so now, whenever we have a credit versus a debit, what do you think that means? Okay, so whenever we have a debit, what do you think that means versus a credit?
They got cash rather than loan.
No, not necessarily. So debits and credits, for the sake of our disclosure, strictly mean how the money moves. Either money goes into my pocket or money goes out of my pocket. Okay, hence why you saw debits and credits on the sheet. Okay, so a debit is when I pay money out. A credit is when money is given back to me. Because think about it like this: when you go to the department store, say you bought something and lost the receipt, and you're taking it back, what do they give you? A credit. So that means money's coming into my pocket. Because the way it works is that disclosure that I just showed you, that's a ledger that gets added and subtracted based on the debits and credits. And at the bottom, it shows you how much the buyer needs to bring to close the deal. And then it shows the seller how much they walk away with. Okay, so, and that's after they tally up all the debits and credits. Okay, so now, understanding that a debit is money being paid and a credit money coming in. From now on, anytime that you see, for example, a no, 1 second. Okay, so from now on, anytime that you see like something, a fee or a tax or something that needs to be paid, that is a debit to whoever is supposed to pay it. So for example, when we looked at the title insurance policies, okay, what do we establish that who pays the owner's policy?
So
The seller. So therefore, what is that? A fee. So that would be debit to seller for whatever that amount is. And that'll be deducted off of the total 100% that comes into the transaction. Because remember, when we did the commission, that commission, let's say, is that 6% that we would deduct from the 100% that comes into the transaction. Okay, so now that gets translated as, if it's a fee, for example, that owner's policy, that would be a debit to seller, because the seller's paying that fee, versus the lender's policy, that would be a debit to buyer, because the buyer's the one paying it. So anytime that it's a debt or a payment or something that you have to pay out and money going out, it's always a debit. Anytime money comes back in, let's say that the seller pays for the closing costs, that you negotiate that the seller's going to pay you for the closing costs. Now the buyer's going to receive a credit for those closing costs, and that will appear as a debit on the seller side. So that way it balances in the ledger. Does that make sense? Okay. So, 1 second. Okay. So now we need to start getting into the prorations. Okay, guys? And so now we're going to look at property taxes first. Okay. Okay, so what did I say a proration was? It was divvying up a fee between two parties. Okay, now this is what we call a double entry. Okay, prorations are double entries because think about it. We just said a proration is taking an amount and divvying up between two parties. In this case, right? So if both parties are involved with that fee, then it's a double entry. It's got to be a debit to one and a credit for that same amount because they're divvying it up for a certain amount. Okay, so now a single entry, like we just stated with the title and owner's policy, it only involves one person. So therefore, it would only be a debit to buyer or a debit to seller. That makes sense? Okay. So now let's look at property taxes. All right. So now, imagine that the closing date for the transaction is July 23rd. Now, one thing you need to know also, guys, July 23rd, is that us today? Is that what oh yeah, cool. So July 23rd, and the closing date belongs to the buyer. Okay? So that means that the day of closing, you always got to chuck it up to the side of the buyer. So the seller will only pay up until the day before, or whatever the case may be. So closing day always goes on the buyer side. Just keep that in mind. So the annual property taxes are $3467.50. $3467.50 are the property taxes on the property. Okay. So now they're telling us how much is the seller to pay the buyer for the days the seller owned the property. The day of closing is charged to the buyer. Now, just so you're aware, in case you're looking at the book, they mentioned the 365 day or the 360 day processes. Don't worry about the 360. We're always gonna do the 365. Okay? Just keep that in mind. We're always gonna do the 365. This is gonna be on page 339. Okay? And don't worry about the equation, guys, because although the equation is there, by learning how to do it properly, the equation comes up. Okay, so let's understand how to do it first. All right, so now, knowing that the closing date is July 23rd, right? And knowing that the property taxes are $3467.50, first things first, we have to figure out how many days the seller lived in the property. Because essentially, look at it this way. This is January 1st. This is December 31st. Okay? When does the property close? July 23rd, which is what? Somewhere in the middle, right? So imagine July 23rd being right here. That's closing day. Okay? So now, that amount needs to be divvied up in about half. Because look at the logic. So when are property taxes due and they're payable? When are they due? No, taxes are paid in arrears. Property taxes are paid in arrears, so they're paid at the end. So when are property taxes paid? What day? They begin payable. We just talked about it. Nope, that's when they begin adding.
Oh, if it was September, wasn't it?
Nope. Correct, November 1st. So that's when they become payable. So now, taxes are due over here, but we're closing right here. Who's gonna pay for the property taxes at the end of the year? The buyer, because they own the property at that day. But the seller lived on the property from January 1st all the way to July 22nd. Because the 23rd belongs to the buyer. So now, what we need to understand is that this portion from this day to this day needs to be credited or given to the buyer so they can pay the full bill at the end of the year. Make sense? So ultimately, this is what we're looking for. Because this amount, it doesn't matter, the new buyer is gonna keep, acquiring their days. So we need to figure out this. So now, what do we need to do? We need to figure out how many days were in January. 31. February is gonna have 28 days. Always do 28, no leap years. March, 31st. April, 30. May, 31st. Then June, 30. And July, how many days? Well, it can't be, we're closing on July, buddy.
Oh.
Good shot, good try though. Correct, 22 days, why 22 days? Correct, because the closing day belongs to the buyer. So now, you add up all the days that the seller lived in the property, which adds up to 203 days. Okay? So now that you know how many days the seller lived in the property, we need to take the total amount, 3467.50, and do what? By?
300.
Correct. We need to figure out how much we're paying daily. Because we figured out how many days the person lived there, but we need to figure out now how much we're getting charged, because this is for 365 days. So what is the daily? Okay, how much we're paying per day? 365, and we divide that, is going to be $9.50. So we pay $9.50 per day.
It's crazy. You pay just about the same in county jail.
Is that right?
You can say you charge.
So we take the $9.50 times our 203, and that gives us $1928.50. Now, here's where you want to check yourself, and this is why I do these. Because this gives me a visual of where I break this up at. So if I'm not sure if my answer is correct, my answer should be somewhere in the half of this amount. Is 1928 half about 35? Just about. So that tells me that I'm in the right path. Because if I get too short of an answer or little answer or a big answer, I already know I did it wrong because I should be landing somewhere in the middle. That makes sense? So now, what you need to know now is, how do I write it in the closing disclosure or that paper that we just saw? So in this case, what is this that we said? Is property taxes, which is a proration because like we stated, both parties are involved in paying that fee. So now what we need to understand is that the seller owes the buyer 1928.50 for the 203 days they live in the property. So then title company is going to transfer that amount and give the buyer a credit for that amount so they can pay the total bill at the end of the year. And they already received this at closing from the seller.
So I have a question. What if you moved in and your closing day was like towards the ending of the year? And you would wait to obviously that next pay period, correct? Which would be that November. You receive a penalty for not paying the year before, or
What do you mean?
it's like, all right, let's say here at the end.
Give me a date.
Like December 22nd.
Okay, well then in that case, the buyer's paying the seller. Because the seller already paid it. If the seller already paid it by the time we close, like if we close December 15th and the seller paid it November 1st for the whole year. Well, the buyer is going to be living in the property for 15 days.
Also the remainder of whatever.
So whatever 15 days worth on a daily rate that the seller already paid, they'll refund that back to the seller. So then the 15 days the buyer is now going to live in the property is already paid by the time they close. So it'll be kind of backwards because the seller already paid it. This is, since we're in the middle of the year, they have to be paid at the end. So now I got to transfer the seller's portion to the buyer, so the buyer pays the whole thing.
Just prepaying.
Hmm?
It's like prepaying?
No, backwards.
Oh, my.
Remember, you're paying in arrears, you're paying at the end, you're not paying in the beginning. Okay? So guys, the way you would write another disclosure on something like this would be 1928.50 debit to seller. 1928.50 credit to buyer. That's how you would write, that's the answer. So now that would be answer A. Answer B, they're gonna put the opposite. Whatever this subtracted from this is going to be that amount, debit to seller, credit to buyer. Also, be careful, because now B is going to be 1928.50. Let's say credit to seller. So now they'll flip these on you. They'll keep the same amount, but then they'll flip these. So understand which ones are credits and which ones are debits. And the way you understand that is just how their money moves. If it's going out of my pocket, it's always a debit. If it's coming into my pocket, it's always a credit. And that's how you bring the logic. Okay. Now, let's see. So that's going to be property taxes. Okay, guys. And I'm going to move through these quicker. So at least since we're going to go a little bit above 9 o'clock, because I'm going to push a little bit further. And the reason I'm going to push a little bit further today is because of we're going to break for, the weekend. And I want to make sure at least you guys kind of get a little bit of this and be able to practice it at the end or over the weekend, because this part is important. And it does take some practice to really get it down. Okay, so let's do the next one. Okay, so the next one's gonna be, I'm gonna do prepaid rent. No, actually, I'm gonna do assumed interest. Because this one is just like property taxes, but on a monthly basis. So assumed interest is when you have a mortgage. Mortgage, you pay interest. So now the issue is, if let's say I'm paying my regular mortgage payment in the beginning of the month. right? Every month on the 1st or by the 5th, I have to make my mortgage payment. But my mortgage payment, I'm paying principal and I'm paying interest for that month, correct? So now if we close in the middle of the month, technically, and somebody's assuming your loan, now they're the ones responsible for some of those interests. Okay, so now you have to prorate that interest since they're assuming your loan. Okay, what do I mean by assuming your loan? They're taking over that loan. Do you remember when we stated earlier what assumability is and assumable mortgages? You're taking that loan at that interest rate. So if, let's say, you bought a property near the pandemic years and you're at 3.5% and your loan's assumable, I can now take whatever your balance is at that interest rate, take out a second mortgage at a regular interest rate, and my payment drops because now I'm not taking the whole loan at 7%, taking half the loan at 3.5 and the other half at 7. But the bank has to approve you.
How does that work?
You just go to the bank and say, I want to assume the loan, and as long as you're qualified through the lender, the bank will let you assume it. You get that loan from the seller at whatever interest rate, and whatever the remaining amount is, you're already approved for the whole property. That bank will give you the difference. And now you'll save money because part of the loan, you're paying at a lower interest rate than if you take out one mortgage at the interest rate in today's market. So for example, my seller, I had a seller recently. He had a loan at 4.5%. We were selling the house at 260 or 280 or no, 270. We're selling at 270. Well, his loan was, or his mortgage was like 125 at 4.5%. So then if a buyer buys his house at 280 and they can assume the loan, well, 120,000 of the total 280, they're paying at 4.5%. And then the remaining, they're paying it at whatever today's interest rate is. So instead of paying 280 at 7%, they're paying one something at 7% and one something at 4.5%, which will lower their payment drastically. In our case, it would lower the buyer's payment by like 150, almost $200. Correct, because the interest rate was so different back then. That's why assumable loans are a great strategy for buyers that are tight on money, because you can assume the loan at a different, at the old interest rate, as long as the bank approves. So now in the sense of the interest, we got to divvy up the interest because I'm taking over that loan. I'm assuming it, I'm getting it transferred. So in this case, let's look at an example. So essentially, a home is scheduled to close on May 8th. So closing is May 8th. Okay, then the buyer has an interest rate of 4.5%. So they bought the property at a 4.5% interest, and their monthly payment is $612.62. Payment monthly. And then they're telling us that the balance as of May 1st is $93,600 is the balance. Okay, so now this is pretty much going to be just like property taxes. The only difference is on a monthly basis because it'll always be written the exact same way. So we'll do our chart. So this is going to be May 1st. This is going to be May 31st. Okay, when are we closing? The 8th. Okay, so that's about a quarter of the way. Okay, so now what we do is we take our 93,600 and we multiply it by our interest rate. So that way we can get our yearly interest. So when we multiply the 93,000 by 4.5, we get 4212. So that means that we're paying $4,212 in interest for the year. Okay, because we're multiplying our yearly interest rate by whatever the balance is. No, by 365. Remember. Correct. But remember, everything's on a daily. We always use the 365 method. Okay, so now we take our 4212 divided by 365, and we get 1153.97.26. 1153.97.26. What did I tell you guys? Do not round until you get to the last number. Put as many numbers as you can, because if you start rounding, it's gonna throw the final figure off. And the numbers get real tight in these scenarios. So we pay 1153 daily. Okay? And how many days did the seller own the property? What do you think, Miss Magda? 8?
8 days.
How many?
The seller?
Correct. How many days the seller owned the property in that month?
7 days.
Correct. Why? Because the 8th day belongs to the buyer. So therefore, you have 7 days. Okay? So now what you do is you take your 7 days and multiply it by your daily rate, which is 1153.97.26. And that is going to give us a total of 8077.80, which will round now that we're at the bottom to 8078. Okay, so that is how much has to be prorated for your property taxes. Okay, or for your interest. And the way you write it is you write it the exact same way that you would write your property taxes. It's gonna be 8078 debit to seller, 8078 credit to buyer. Make sense, guys? So that's gonna be assumed interest, okay? And I'm doing this quickly just so we can take a look at them, so at least when you go practice at home over the weekend, you kind of have an idea. When we get back on Monday, we're gonna go over these again and go in a little bit more detail, just to make sure you understood, just to make sure you're clear, just to make sure we answer all your questions, because that's why I'm pushing a little bit further today. So that way you get everything you need for the weekend and can at least take care of practicing the math. So now we're gonna do prepaid rent. Okay? So now, what is prepaid rent? Is when you own an investment property, and essentially, when is the rent paid? First of the month. But if we close in the middle of the month, technically the seller received the full payment for the month, when the buyer now also owns the property a few days in that month. So now the seller now needs to give the buyer their portion of the rent for the days the buyer owned the property, because they received the total month on day 1. Does that make sense? Okay, so now prepaid rent. Assume that a property rents for $12.45 per month. So $12.45 is your monthly payment. Okay, also, they're telling us that the closing date is on June 21st. And then I always write buyer so I don't forget. Then, the landlord received the tenant's rent on the 1st of the month, therefore the buyer is entitled to closing on the day of June. So now we figure it out. Okay, we take June 1st. I always make a point to do this, guys. June 1st, June 30th, right? Yeah, 30th. And we close on the 21st, which is 3/4 of the way. Okay, so now 12:45, what do we do with our 12:45? Nope, we gotta figure out our daily. Well, why would we divide it for 365 when we're talking monthly?
Multiply.
So therefore, we divide it by, correct, 30. Because this month only has 30 days. Now, if it was a payment that it counted for more months, okay, we have to do 365 now. So it's gonna be divided by 30 days. That is going to give us $41.50. So we pay $41.50 for rent every day. All right, now let's look at it this way. The 21st belongs to the buyer, right? So how many days did the buyer own the property?
No.
So 21,
Yeah.
22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 10 days. Okay, so buyer owns 10 days. So that means that what we're really figuring out in this problem is not this first amount, is the last amount. Because what is this first amount right here?
Belongs to the seller.
Correct, it's earned income, because they were the owner of the property. So since I got paid the rent for the whole month, 20 days worth of rent are my income, I earned it, because I'm the owner. But since you bought the property on the 21st, and I received the whole month, now I gotta give you 10 days worth of that payment. So, because you own the property for 10 days that month. Now, the next month, the tenant's gonna give you on the first of the month, all the rent, because you're now the new owner. I'm done with that property. Okay, so now if I multiply by 10, which is my days, I get 415. So that means that the seller must give the buyer or credit the buyer $415. Because that is what that is what amounts to 10 days worth of rent. And now let's check it out. Is that about 3/4 of the way? More or less? Yeah, just about. 1245 divided by 3 is gonna be around 3 and change, 350, 3 something. So ultimately, it is about right. So now, how do you write it on the disclosure? 415?
Debit to the seller
Correct.
and credit to the buyer.
Correct. Perfect, Magda. 415. Credit to buyer. And that's your answer. Oh. As hard as that, guys. Okay, so now let's do the next one. The next set, and then we should be done for today. Again, I just want to present them to you, so at least you can kind of see it, get the logic down, and you don't have to rely on the book now to teach you. And now you have questions to ask next week. Okay. So that's gonna be the 3 prorations that we're gonna have to do. Okay, guys? But now there's another section that we have to learn. Okay? And this is gonna be your documentary stamp taxes or transfer taxes. Okay? So this is gonna be your state documentary stamp transfer tax. Your state documentary stamp transfer taxes. Now, guys, this has 2 names. The reason I write the entire thing out, and this is what I'm gonna do for you guys. I created an entire little mini system or process that tells me how to do everything for this entire system. But I gotta write it down every single time. So this is called transfer taxes, also called state documentary stamp taxes. But what I didn't want is for them to tell me one name or the other and me forget. So I always make sure that I wrote it all out. Let's look at it logically. These are the state's taxes on the documents that transfer ownerships of properties. Okay, so the documents that allow the property to change hands also get taxed. And what are those documents? What do we say that the seller signs that allows the property to transfer the title to transfer hands? Correct. So on the seller side, what allows the property to go to the buyer is the deed. Okay, so that's gonna be the first document that we're gonna get taxed on, the deed. Now, from the buyer side, what allows the property to go to the seller? Or I mean, the money to go to the seller? Nope, remember, the title is owned by the seller. What must the seller receive in order for the property to go to the buyer?
Money.
The money. And what document tells us how much and what we've been lent and everything? Huh? Nope. That is where we write everything down. But what document shows us all the terms to the contract? Correct. Again, Magda, awesome. So that's gonna be your note. Okay, so the actual promissory note is what releases the money to the seller. So therefore, that document also gets taxed because that's what moves the property. The seller signs the deed, the buyer signs the note, and boom, money goes to the seller, property goes to the buyer, and exchange we have done. And those are the two documents that transfer the property.
So are you paying the amount of the taxes that they charge for you to do that transfer?
Correct. Each party is gonna also have a debit.
You have to pay it.
Everybody has closing costs. That's part of your closing costs. All of this is part of your closing costs.
So you buy a
Correct.
property,
Huh?
So when you buy a property, right?
Everybody's paying this, all of us. And if we go back next week, remind me to pull up the disclosure. We can go look at every single item that we covered right here is gonna be right there. Unless it doesn't apply. Like if there's not a prepaid rent or an investment property, you're not gonna see prepaid rent. If you're not assuming the mortgage, you're not gonna see the assumed interest. Only what applies. You just have to know what's in the test.
So you always read the process from certain number, right? Promissory notes, right?
Correct.
You read,
What about it?
you always will read them, check them.
Well, if you don't check it, how you know what you're gonna loan, bro?
What
Like, that's literally the most important document you gotta know.
Correct.
That's your terms. Telling you how much they're lending you, or what interest rate, what are your rules, the clauses, the prepayment penalties, everything is in the
Because
promissory.
I didn't even want, I got screwed.
So what?
Because the one that I was telling you for the 10,000 that I owe.
You got screwed on?
Yeah.
Well, because you probably didn't read. You see? So you got it.
High interest rate.
Correct, but that, it happens, man.
Yeah.
We have to go through the learning
I was
process.
doing-
So, also, there's one more tax that we pay on. It is called the intangible tax. So, which is strictly for new notes. Okay, meaning, if let's say, I borrow from the bank $100,000 to buy my property. Well, I'm gonna get hit with 100,000 on the note. Taxes on that, and I'm gonna get hit 100,000 since it's a new note. Okay, we're gonna find out how much we pay for each in a second. Okay, but now imagine if I'm buying a property for 100,000, right? But I'm assuming 50,000 of that loan that the seller already had at a better interest rate. So how much more do I need to close that deal?
Wait, say that one more time?
So if I'm buying a property for 100,000, but I'm assuming 50 from the mortgage that the seller had at a better interest rate, how much am I missing to close that deal? 50. So I need to get a new note for 50, so it totals my 100, so I can purchase the property, correct?
Yeah.
So I go to the bank and I say, okay, I need another 50 to close the deal. I'm already assuming 50. Okay, so now, under that scenario, this only applies to new notes. So how much am I gonna get taxed on here? Or for how much? How much total? 50. Because the thing is, since I'm assuming that loan, that note has already been hit with the intangible when the seller originally created it. So you're not gonna get taxed on old notes or anything you assume. It's gotta be brand new. Correct, okay. So now, who do we say pays for the deed? Correct, the seller. Why do they pay for it? Because the rule of thumb, they signed for it, just to kind of keep it to the basics. How about the note? Correct, why? Because they signed the note. And now, if the intangible goes with new notes, who pays for this? Correct, the buyer. Okay, now, essentially, now, whenever we're calculating on the deed, what do we normally use to start our calculations? What is the deed based off of? Correct, which is called? The price, the purchase price.
I was looking for a different word. Not bad.
No problem, you're good, bro. That was a good answer. Purchase price. Okay, now if we're dealing with the note, how much would the note be? Nope. What is the note? What does the note tell you? Huh? Sure, but what is the 50,000 in this case then? If we use the purchase price here, what amount will we use here? No, don't worry about the specific number. Worry about what it is.
The purchase price plus,
No, no,
interest.
no plus. What do we use to calculate the note?
What do you use?
Correct. So if the deed is if the taxes on the deed are based off the purchase price, what do you think the taxes on the note are gonna be based off? No,
Property tax?
no. What does the note tell us? Well, among other things, but what does it also tell us?
The tax is gonna be,
No, that's not what we calculate.
How much you owe?
Correct, which is what? What is that called? Come on, Zoom, help me out here. What is that called? What you owe is what? Which is also called your loan amount,
Oh, no.
meaning what they're lending you. Exactly, loan amount. Because this is does to do with lending. You don't pay purchase price because if you have a down payment, you've already paid. You're only paying on what the bank is lending you, so it's your loan amount. Okay, make sure you know the difference because you're gonna get purchase price, you're gonna get loan amounts, you're gonna get interest, and they're gonna build you an entire case. Robert is buying a property with 80% LTV at a 5% interest rate in which the blah, 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 then they start breaking everything down. Now you gotta extract that if, let's say, you bought a property for 300,000 on 80% LTV, well, the 300,000 you use for the deed, but then you have to calculate the loan amount. What would you do to calculate the loan amount? Multiply the 300,000 by the 80, because LTV is how much you owe. The other 20 is your down payment. You see how now everything kind of combines and comes it together. You gotta use these terms because they're gonna give you the whole scenario, and now you have to break it down. So then also, this is on new notes, okay? Now, what we also need to know, guys, is the rules or how much we pay per tax. So the rule on the deed is that you're going to pay for every $100. You're gonna, oh, I'm sorry. You're gonna pay 70 cents per $100. That's your tax. 70 cents per 100. Okay? The rule on the note is gonna be 35 cents per $100. And then the intangible is strictly 2 mils. Which translates to? Alright, that's what we're using the calculator. And also, I'm going to add a little asterisk right here. Because the asterisk is my reminder about something in particular to this problem and this problem alone. So now, as long as you have this built, guys, this is your entire roadmap. It tells you what the formulas are and how to calculate it. It tells you what values to use. It tells you what items, and it tells you who pays for them. If you get in the practice of building this, this will give you the answers and teach you how to calculate everything. So make sure you have this because it will make your life that much easier.
Wow.
Okay, so now let's go ahead and do the calculation real quick. Let's do an example. Okay, so imagine, okay, so let's imagine that the property was sold for $179,950. So purchase price is $179,950. Okay, then also they're telling us that the buyer paid $25,000 down. So down payment is $25,000. So that means that the mortgage or the arranged loan was $154,950. So loan amount $154,950. Now, if they didn't give me loan amount and they just gave me these two, how would I calculate my loan amount?
say the purchase price.
Yeah.
and the down payment.
Correct, subtract the 25 down payment from the purchase price and it gives you the loan amount anyway. Just so you guys, we stay on track. Okay, So that now it says, what are the transfer taxes on the transaction? Okay, so now we gotta begin. This is all they're giving us. Okay, so what did I say we use here? Right here, boom. First step, purchase price. So now we take the 179, 950. And what do? Nope. It's 70 cents per 100. So we need to divide by 100 first. So that gives us 179, 9.5. 50. Okay? Right? But this is the thing, guys. And here's where the asterisk kicks in. These are taxes. So the government is not going to charge us on cents. We need to round it to the next dollar. So that is what the asterisk is for. Correct. So you would now go to the next dollar, it's gonna be 1,800 that you're gonna get taxed on, not the 50 cents. So even if it says 0.000001, you gotta go to the next dollar, because the government wants their dollar. All right, any decimal whatsoever, and this is the only one in the entire book that you're gonna do something like this. That's why I included the asterisk there. That's my reminder that when I build this, because this is the thing, guys. When you're working these problems out, write this every single time. Engrave it in your heads, because this is the answers to all the problems, all right here. Okay, so now our pre-thing totals is 70 cents per every 100. Why is it 70 cents per every 100? Why is it not just 70 cents? Because otherwise we'll be paying 70% of the entire purchase price on transfer taxes alone. That's impossible. So then they say, okay, so instead of every dollar, we're not going to charge you 70 cents per every dollar. We're going to charge you 70 cents per every $100. So it's more feasible. Okay, so now you take your 1,800 times 0.7, and that is going to give you 1,260. Okay, so 1,260. Now we move on to our note. Boom. So what do we use here to start? What number? What do you mean, Magda? We just wrote right here. This is look.
No, it's the 154.
Correct, because now we're waking. No. It's not to be sorry. This is so you realize it. You know what I mean? Because our natural inclination would be to say, oh, the house cost 179. No, we're working the note. That's why we wrote loan amount. So it tells you right away what to use to calculate the problem. That's why I built this. This is your answer sheet. That's your cheat sheet. Okay, this tells you what you need, who pays for it, what you use, the formula. Don't forget. The asterisk is the don't forget part. So now I use my loan amount, 154,950. Correct. Which will give me 154,950. Then what? Then what do I do, Magda?
That would be,
No, what do I have to do? Next,
after I get the 1549,
after the 1549.50, what do I do?
I multiply by, no, okay.
There's my reminder. There's my asterisk. That's why it's there. Oh, I got a decimal place after I divided by my 100. Oh, I got to round to the next dollar. So you round to 1550. Okay? So after I round to my 1550, now I multiply by my 0.35. And that is going to give me 542.50. And then we do our intangible. And is this a total note? Yes, it is a brand new note. They never said anything about assumed mortgage. They never said anything about anything like that. So now we take our 154.50, which is my loan amount. And then again, this is loan amount. 154, 950, and what do I do here? Correct, by? Correct, remember, the formula is right here. It doesn't show, tangible is not divided by 100, it's just a clean multiplication by the 2 mils. That is all. You take now and multiply by the 0.002, and you get, 309. Yeah, you get 3099. Okay, so now that I have all the taxes that I need to pay, what did the question ask me? What are the transfer taxes on the transaction? Okay, well, the transfer tax on the transaction, all you have to do is add them all together, and that is going to give you 2112.40. So that's going to give you now, if you add it all together, what I want to write it right here. 2140. Is that what it is? Oh, no, 2112.40, sorry about that. Okay, so that's gonna be the total property tax or transfer taxes for the transaction. Now, you gotta be careful, guys, even though we solved it out total, you gotta focus on what they're asking, because what if they ask, what is the transfer taxes for the seller and how do I write it in the disclosure? What is that answer? What are the transfer taxes for the seller and how do I write it in the property disclosure or in the closing disclosure? Huh?
You want it?
I don't know. How do I, like, same thing we did before.
You just say, there's gonna be,
We already solved it out. We gotta write it in the disclosure.
so it's 1260, what is that? Debit to buyer? Is that what you mean?
Well, think about it.
Oh, no, it's credit to seller.
Nope. What is this? What is that amount? What is that? The 1260.
Oh, that's the transfer fee. That's how much it is.
Correct. What was that last word you said? Transfer what?
Fee.
Okay, so it's an expense. If you have to pay something, what is it?
Debit.
Exactly. So the answer is correct. 1260 debit to seller. All right. Now, if they say, what does the buyer pay? What are the transfer taxes for the buyer? Now,
Debit to buyer.
correct. So now what does the buyer pay? The buyer has to pay 542.50 plus 309.90 debit to buyer, because both of these are paid by the buyer. Listen, guys, everything's right here. Every question that I'm gonna tell you is answered by knowing this. You know what I mean? What does the seller pay? Well, the seller only pays the deed, 1260, it's a fee, so it's gotta be a debit. Okay?
So 3 are debit to buy.
Hmm?
So debit to buy,
For which one?
the 3 of them.
Well, I mean, how can it be the three of them? You know what I mean?
He confused himself.
That's fine, no worries. So now, if I ask, what is the transfer taxes on the note and how do I write it in the disclosure?
Debit to buyer, 542.50.
Okay, now flip it. 542.50 debit to buyer. Because you gotta put the amount first, so then you know what to do from there. Is there a debit? Is there a credit? For whom? Okay, so now it will be 542.50 debit to buyer. What will be the intangible and how do I write in the disclosure?
Or debit to buyer.
Correct, always check your stuff. Now, keep in mind though, they could ask, what are the costs of the financing, the transfer taxes on the financing, and how do I write it on the disclosure?
The situation is still be the 309 debit to buyer.
Well, technically, that's incorrect. That would be an answer that you're gonna be in the exam, but what are the financing transfer taxes?
Oh, the loan amount and the new note.
Correct, both of these are financing, because this is notes. These are the notes. So therefore, these are the transfer taxes on the financing. So when you add them together, how do you write in the disclosure? Debit to buyer. Okay, and now, are these prorations or single entries? Correct, because each party pays for their own bill. It has nothing to do with the other party, or you know what I mean, there's no divvying up of the same fee. So it's always a debit in that sense, okay? And actually, that's it, guys. But before we leave, I'm gonna throw one last thing at you. In the exam, they may not have you solve things. They may say, how do I write the purchase price in the disclosure? None of the equation, they just want you to know how the money moves, the debits and credits. So if they don't give you an amount, you don't have to solve nothing. You just have to know the logic of how the money moves, so you know what is a debit and what is a credit. So let me ask you this, thinking logically, how do I write the purchase price on the disclosure? I haven't set an amount. So at this point, all it is debit, credit, buyer, seller is just, the logic. So how do I write the disclosure? How does the disclosure work when it comes to the buyer and the seller? Think about it. No, you're fine. If you're gonna say it.
Ask the question one more time.
How do I write the purchase price in the closing disclosure?
Purchase.
Correct.
Credit to the step.
Okay, keep going.
Credit?
Okay, well, is that all? Is that your answer? Credit to seller?
Yeah.
Okay, is it correct?
Be a debit.
What did you just tell me by saying that? That the seller's paying the purchase price, the seller's selling the property, they cannot be paying the purchase price.
So it'd be okay, I got it, so it'd be a debit to buyer. Because.
Well, that's-
The price.
Is that your final answer?
Yeah, because.
Okay, then that's incorrect. If you combine your answer and yours, then you're correct.
Wait, so it's credit. Says credit and debit?
Absolutely, because the purchase price applies to both parties. One is paying for the property, the other one is receiving the money for the property. So therefore, purchase price is a debit to seller, credit to buyer. Because this buyer is paying for the purchase price, whatever it is, and the seller's receiving the money for whatever it is. So therefore, purchase price appears on the closing disclosure as a debit to buyer because they're paying for the property, and a credit to seller because they're receiving the money from the property.
It's both.
So it's both.
Okay.
Okay, now how about this one? How do you write the escrow deposit in the disclosure? If you guys in Zoom over here, if you want to jump in, go ahead. How do you write the closing? How do you write the deposit? The escrow deposit. First and foremost, think to yourself, who does it apply to? And then from there, put the logic. What does the money do? Well, obviously, but it's got to be their debit or seller or credit.
Send to the buyer.
Now think about that answer though. When we're dealing with this stuff, we're at the time of closing. So before the transaction began, yes. But now that we're at closing, where is the escrow at? The escrow deposit, where is it at?
Yes, sir.
That's a credit then to the buyer.
Correct. There you go. Why?
Because the escrow is being held by the seller.
No. It can't. That's conflict of interest. How can it be held by the seller?
Bank is holding that.
No,
That's, the.
How does the buyer hold the escrow? I thought.
the buyer's not holding the escrow.
The agent?
How could the agent hold the escrow? Who closes the deal?
Okay. Or the bank.
The title company.
Oh.
Yeah,
So essentially, the broker's escrow account would technically hold,
Oh, so it was a.
well, it's technically a title
Brokerage.
company. Or whoever's closing the transaction, whoever holds the escrow account, whether it's the title company, the attorney, or the broker.
So which entity, right?
Huh?
Entity. Which-
Yeah, whoever's closing the deal, whether it's the brokers, whether it's the title company or the attorney, whoever received that escrow deposit, what happens? At the time of closing, because this is at the time of closing, that money's sitting in escrow. It's gotta be given back to the buyer, so you can do the calculations, because it's already sitting there, the buyer already paid it. It's in escrow, it's their money though, they have to credit it back, so now they can do the additions and subtractions, and now, does it affect the seller? Not at all, because the deposit only deals with the buyer, and this is the logic you need to start using. Who does it apply to? And how does the money move at the time of closing? Because if it would have been prior to closing or before, it would have been a debit. Correct, but since we're already at closing and they're already paid it, it's gotta be given back. So now we can close the deal because it was a deposit.
So would it have been a credit to the seller had it been before closing?
No, the deposit has nothing to do with the seller. The seller receives the money at time of closing.
Also, either way, it would still have to do with the buyer.
Well, 100% because the deposit, the seller has nothing to do with the deposit. Seller, all they do at the time of closing, they receive their money. That's it.
No.
The deposit and all that crap, that's with the buyer, because that's when we're doing through the transaction, they have to pay the
Escrow is
deposit.
just to keep the money safe while the business.
Correct, it's just to give collateral for the seller in case the buyer breaches contract.
Good faith.
It's good faith deposit, yep. Or technically a consideration. What type of consideration? Valuable or good? Correct. All right, guys, do you guys kind of get the logic? Okay, now how do I write prorations? Well, actually, I'm just kidding.
Divide.
No, prorations usually, depending on what it is, would be, for example, property tax proration will always be debit to seller, credit to buyer, unless deal was closed at the end of the year. So just keep the logic, you know what I mean? We'll reinforce and that's why I wanted to stay a little longer. So at least now when you go home and you work on this chapter, we can practice it, because that does take a little time, but once you get the logic, it facilitates a lot of things, because now when they give you the answer choices and they give you the wrong figures, many times you don't even have to do the math to be able to get the logic down, as long as you can know how the money moves. So we'll go over that on Monday to make sure that we can reinforce it a little bit more. And, you know, hopefully you guys have questions.
Have a good night.
All right, brother. All right, you guys have a good
Thank
one.
you, sir.
You're welcome, my good sir. All right, Zoom, you guys have a great weekend. I'll see you guys on Monday. And any questions, anything else, please let me know. Email me, text me, whatever you need. All right, guys, have a great one, and I will see you on Monday.
Thanks.
All right, my pleasure.